I never believed in hauntings until I camped by Lake Crescent. Not the kind you hear about in ghost stories or tourist pamphlets, but something quieter, something that lingers in the way fog moves over still water, in the sound of crackling fire when no one's around to feed it. My name's Evan Mercer, I'm 34, and I've spent most of my adult life on the road, photographing abandoned campgrounds and forgotten state parks for an online travel archive. It started as a job, but over time, it became something else, a way to stay moving so the silence couldn't catch me. That fall, I drove my old RV up through the Olympic Peninsula, chasing the tail end of summer warmth. Lake Crescent was supposed to be my final stop before heading back inland. Locals in Port Angeles told me the lake was deep enough to swallow whole forests, over 600 feet in some places, and that the water was so cold and clear it could preserve a body for decades. They said it like it was folklore, but their eyes didn't laugh. I remember one older man at a gas station warning me not to camp on the North Shore, claiming that the campfires there never die out. I thought he was joking, some local flavor for tourists. I smiled, nodded, and bought firewood anyway. By dusk, I was parked at a pull-off near the waterline. The campground was long abandoned, its sign half rotted, the fire rings rusted over, picnic tables splintered with moss. I liked it that way. I set up the RV just far enough from the lake to avoid the damp air, yet close enough that I could see the water glimmering through the trees. There was something unnatural about how still the lake was, how it seemed to absorb sound rather than carry it. Even the loons that usually call out at night stayed quiet. The air was heavy with pine and cold vapor, and when I lit my fire, the smoke drifted in strange spirals instead of rising. That first night should have been peaceful. I cooked a small meal, reviewed some photos on my camera, and planned to sleep early. But sometime past midnight, I woke to a flickering orange light outside. Through the condensation on my RV window, I saw what looked like another campfire burning down near the waterline. At first, I thought someone else had arrived, a fisherman maybe, or a late hiker, but there were no voices, no sounds of movement, just the quiet hiss of flames. I stepped outside, the gravel crunching under my boots, and the cold bit into me instantly. The fire was maybe 50 yards away, burning low, the kind of deep ember red that comes after hours of burning. I called out, "Hey there, everything all right?" No response. I waited, expecting to hear a branch snap or a figure shift in the shadows. Nothing. I took a few steps closer, but as I did, the light seemed to dim, flicker, and then, like a gust of wind had blown it out, it was gone. There was no smoke, no smell of burning wood, just the still air and the faint lapping of water against the rocks. When I shone my flashlight toward where it had been, I saw only damp ground. No ash, no logs, no sign of a fire ever existing. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe the reflection of my own fire had caught the fog wrong. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that solitary flame, how it had seemed to breathe on its own. I returned to the RV, locked the door, and left the interior light on until morning. By daylight, everything looked ordinary. The lake was stunningly blue, like melted glass, and the woods around me seemed harmless again. I laughed at myself over coffee, chalked it up to exhaustion, and decided to hike part of the old trail that ran along the shore. The forest smelled rich, cedar, earth, the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. But as I walked, I noticed strange things. The way every sound felt slightly delayed, like echoes coming from behind instead of ahead. My footsteps would crunch, and a second later I'd hear them again, softer. Once I thought I heard a voice calling my name from across the lake, but it was so faint I couldn't tell if it was real. Around noon, I stumbled on a forgotten campsite, an old concrete fire ring half sunk into the soil. Inside it were fragments of charred wood that looked recent, though there was no one around. I touched one piece. It was warm. Not hot, but as if it had been burned just hours earlier. I checked the ground for footprints, tire tracks, anything, but there was nothing. The earth was undisturbed. I told myself it might have been rangers doing maintenance burns, though the site was far too remote for that. Still, It was easier to hold on to a logical explanation than admit something else might be at play. That night, the fog came in early. It rolled off the lake like breath, curling around the trees and muting every sound. I lit my fire again, cooked dinner, and tried to focus on editing my photos, but I couldn't shake the tension crawling up my spine. I kept glancing toward the water. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow moving through the mist, tall and slow, but when I aimed my flashlight, it was gone. Then, faintly, like a whisper, I heard crackling from the shore. Another fire. I turned off my own lanterns to see better. Sure enough, there it was again, that same orange glow pulsing faintly through the fog. This time, though, it wasn't still. It flickered as if someone were walking around it. I could see movement now, a silhouette against the flames. My breath caught. Whoever it was, they were standing perfectly still 1 second, then shifting the next, the way a person might sway when tired. I raised my voice again. "Hey, you need help?" No answer. The figure turned slightly toward me, and for a moment I thought I saw their face illuminated, pale, wet, glistening like the surface of the lake itself. My stomach dropped. I took 1 step forward and the fire dimmed. Then another step and it went out completely, leaving only the sound of water dripping. I backed up slowly, heart hammering, telling myself it was a trick of the light. But when I turned around to retreat toward my RV, my own campfire had gone out too. Not gradually, completely extinguished. The air was colder now, colder than it should have been. I could see my breath hanging in front of me, dense and white. Somewhere out on the water, I heard a splash. Then another, closer this time. Something or someone was moving just offshore. I ran back to the RV, slammed the door, and sat there in the dark, listening. The splashing continued for a while, soft and rhythmic like footsteps in shallow water. Then it stopped. Silence swallowed everything. The next morning, I found prints leading from the lake to where that phantom fire had been. Not boot prints, bare feet. The impressions were small, maybe a woman's or a child's, but the strange thing was how deep they sank, as if whoever made them had been carrying weight, or wasn't entirely solid. They led up the bank, stopped just short of my campsite, and vanished in the gravel. That was when I started to believe the old man's story. Still, I didn't leave. I told myself I was staying to document it, to figure out what caused the lights. But deep down, I think I stayed, because I felt drawn to them, like they were calling me for a reason I couldn't name. That night, I set up my camera on a tripod facing the lake, turned on the infrared, and waited. The fog rolled in thick again, sealing off the world beyond a few yards. It muffled everything, the faint hum of insects, the distant sigh of the forest, until all I could hear was the faint crackling of my small campfire and my own pulse. I sat beside the camera, watching its tiny red light blink in the dark. The lake was invisible beyond the mist, but I could smell it, cold, metallic, and strangely sweet, like rain on old stone. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. I'd nearly dozed off when I heard it, the faint hiss of kindling catching flame. I froze, ears straining. Then came the glow, muted orange, trembling through the fog. The same phantom fire, flickering low near the waterline. I stared through the camera's viewfinder, zooming in. There was definitely something there this time. The outline of a figure, crouched near the flames, unmoving. I couldn't make out details, but the posture was wrong, too rigid, as if the person weren't sitting but balanced somehow, leaning forward in an unnatural way. My throat went dry. The wind shifted suddenly, sending the fog sweeping across the scene. When it cleared, the fire was gone, but the figure was standing now, closer. My breath caught. The light from my campfire flickered across wet hair, skin that glistened darkly like soaked fabric. I whispered without meaning to, "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head. I swear I heard something then. Not words exactly, but a low hum carried by the mist. A woman's voice, maybe, soft and cracked like water against ice. The sound vibrated through the trees and into my chest. Then the light vanished again. I tore my gaze away, fumbling for the RV door. My fingers shook as I climbed inside, slamming it behind me. Through the fogged window, I could still see faint movement outside, a shadow pacing near where the fire had been. My camera was still recording, lens pointed toward the lake. When morning came, I checked the footage. The first few hours showed nothing but drifting fog and the faint shimmer of my own fire. Then, right around 2:17 a.m., the other light appeared, clear as day on infrared, a fire burning without fuel. And there she was. The figure stood ankle-deep in the lake, her face turned toward the camera. Even in the grayscale image, her eyes reflected the light like glass. Her mouth was open slightly, and water was running from it, steady as a stream. The moment the wind shifted, she disappeared. The fire blinked out in the same frame. That was enough for most people to pack up and drive off. But not me, because as I watched that footage again, frame by frame, I noticed something else. A second figure, standing deeper in the fog behind her, broad-shouldered, motionless. And when the woman vanished, the second shape remained for a heartbeat longer before dissolving into static. Something about it didn't feel malevolent. Not exactly. It felt desperate, like it was trying to be seen. Later that morning, I drove into Port Angeles, trying to shake the feeling clinging to me like cold sweat. I found a small diner near the docks and started asking quiet questions. At first, people brushed me off, but one waitress, mid-40s, sun-worn face, paused when I mentioned the North Shore. She hesitated, then sat down across from me. "You saw the fires, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. She nodded anyway. "Most folks don't talk about them, but they've been there for decades." She told me about a couple who vanished from those woods in the 1970s, campers from Oregon, Clara and Martin Reed. They were last seen near East Beach, the same area where I'd parked. Search parties found their campsite days later. Tent torn open, 2 chairs by a dead fire, footprints leading into the water and stopping halfway in. No bodies were ever recovered. The sheriff's report claimed hypothermia, but locals said differently. They said the couple argued loudly the night they disappeared, and neighbors on the far side of the lake saw 2 separate fires burning until dawn. "Sometimes the fires come back," the waitress whispered. "Always in pairs. One burns steady, the other flickers. Then they both vanish before sunrise." I wanted to dismiss it as small-town superstition, but something in her voice, tired, resigned, made me believe her. Before I left, she added quietly, "If you stay another night, don't answer when they call your name." That warning stayed with me the whole drive back. I should have left then. I should have packed up, deleted the footage, and never thought of it again. But as night fell, I found myself back by the water's edge, camera ready. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something heavier. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. Because somewhere deep down, I felt like I knew what those fires were trying to show me. When the fog rolled in again, thicker than ever, I lit my own campfire and waited. The smoke rose and twisted unnaturally, curling back toward the ground. My chest felt tight, as if the air itself were pushing inward. Then came the sound, soft splashes moving closer. I turned toward the lake, heart pounding. 2 lights flickered into view across the water, twin fires, perfectly still. Their reflections rippled faintly on the surface, but the flames themselves didn't move. I raised my camera, zooming in. That same woman stood beside one fire, the man beside the other. They faced each other but didn't touch, didn't move. The fog pulsed. A low hum filled the air again, resonant this time, vibrating through my bones. And then, faintly, too faintly, I heard it. A voice, fragile and broken, Evan. It wasn't the woman's voice, it was my sister's. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My sister Leah had drowned 10 years ago, a kayaking accident in Oregon. I hadn't been there. I'd been too busy with a photography assignment halfway across the state. That guilt had followed me everywhere, every empty road, every lonely campsite. I stumbled forward, whispering, "Leah?" The fires flared brighter. The woman's face shifted in the glow. First hers, then Leah's. Then something else entirely. I took another step toward the lake before I realized what I was doing. The water lapped at the shore, black and mirror smooth. I don't know what stopped me, maybe instinct, maybe the faint echo of that waitress's warning, but I froze. The voice called again, softer now, pleading. I backed away slowly, shaking. The fires dimmed in unison, then extinguished. Behind me, my own fire had gone cold. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the RV watching the footage again and again until dawn. On the last playback, right before the flames vanished, I caught a glimpse of something new. My reflection. Faint in the corner of the frame, standing right beside the woman, but I hadn't moved from my camera. When the first light broke over the trees, I packed up everything, camera, gear, even the half-burnt wood, and drove until the lake disappeared behind the ridges. Still, sometimes, on long drives at night, I catch that flicker in the rearview mirror. A small, steady orange glow just beyond the curve of the road. And when I roll down the window, the air always smells faintly of lake water and smoke. A few days later, I found myself parked at a small rest area off Highway 101, somewhere between Forks and Aberdeen. I hadn't planned to stop, but fatigue had settled into my bones like damp air. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The footage, the voices, the reflection, it all played over and over in my mind like an unfinished song. I thought getting distance would help, but the strange thing was, the farther I drove from Lake Crescent, the louder the silence around me seemed to hum. That night, I didn't bother setting up camp. I stayed inside the RV with the curtains drawn, a single lantern glowing beside me. I tried to distract myself by flipping through old photographs on my laptop, but every image seemed to bleed into the same fog-shrouded memory of that lake. The water, the fire, the voice. At around 2 a.m, I started hearing it again, the faint crackling of a fire somewhere close by. I told myself it was just someone else stopping to rest, maybe lighting a small campfire by their vehicle. But when I peeked through the blinds, there was no one. Just the reflection of orange light dancing across the fogged glass of my windshield. I stepped outside, barefoot, shivering. The highway was empty, the trees looming like black monoliths against a thin wash of moonlight. The orange flicker came from the tree line maybe 20 yards away. Not steady like before, weak, fluttering, almost gasping. I should have ignored it, but fear can twist into something like curiosity when you've seen too much of the same darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward it. The air smelled like wet ash. My feet sank into the moss, and the cold seeped through me. When I reached the clearing, there it was again, a small fire burning in a perfect circle of stones, the kind you find at campsites. Except I knew I hadn't passed any in miles. I crouched near it, studying the flames. They didn't give off heat, not even smoke. It was like watching light pretend to be fire. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure sitting just across the flames from me. I lifted my light slowly and froze. It was Leah. Not as she'd looked when she died, but as she had years before that. Warm-eyed, smiling faintly, her hair damp as though she'd just come out of the water. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly. Her voice wasn't echoing this time. It was clear, human, real. I couldn't speak. My throat locked, my breath catching somewhere between fear and grief. She looked at me for a long moment, then at the fire, as if listening to it. "They're trapped there," she said. "The ones who die and aren't found. The lake keeps their warmth, their voices, their memories." My flashlight dimmed suddenly, the beam fading until I could barely see her face. "Clara and Martin?" I asked. She nodded. "They wanted to be seen," she continued, "but they need someone to carry their fire away from that place." I didn't understand, but I felt the weight of it. She reached out a hand toward me across the flames. "You can leave it there," she whispered, "or you can take it with you." When she said that, I noticed something strange about the fire. It had split into 2 small, separate flames, flickering in rhythm with each other, like heartbeats. Then, without warning, the air shifted. A gust of wind rushed through the clearing, and the fire vanished. The light died all at once. My flashlight went out too. In the sudden dark, I could still see her outline, a faint gray shimmer, before she dissolved into mist. I stumbled back toward the RV, breathing hard, my chest aching as if I'd run for miles. When I slammed the door shut, the interior lights flickered on by themselves. The lantern on my counter glowed faintly, orange. I sat there for hours, staring at it. It burned steady, not with flame, but with a soft, living light that pulsed gently. I didn't touch it. I just watched. The next morning, it was gone. All that remained was the faint smell of smoke and a ring of condensation on the metal surface where the lantern had been. After that night, I never saw the phantom campfires again, not in mirrors, not in fog, not even in dreams. But I began to notice something else. Every place I stopped, every empty campground, every roadside pullout had its own quiet echo, as if something unseen was settling finally into rest. The air felt lighter, the silence less accusing. I sent my footage to a small archive of local historians months later. They analyzed it frame by frame, declared it inconclusive, and asked if I'd return to capture more. I told them no. I'd already brought enough of that lake with me. When people ask why I still camp alone, why I keep traveling from one forgotten place to another, I tell them it's because I'm looking for light. Not the kind you can see, but the kind you carry when something dark finally lets go. Lake Crescent still appears in my dreams sometimes, the water smooth as glass, the faint shimmer of fires along its edge. But now, when I hear that quiet crackle in the distance, I don't feel fear anymore. Just understanding. Maybe some places don't haunt us to scare us. Maybe they just want to be remembered, so they can finally fade. And when I drive at night, the mist curling around the headlights, I sometimes think I see her, Leah, standing by the roadside, smiling that quiet smile, her reflection warm against the glass. Then she's gone, and I keep driving, the sound of unseen campfires whispering somewhere behind me. And for the first time in years, I don't look back. I've been on the road for 12 years now. Name's Mark Dalton, 53 years old, and for the better part of life, I've believed the open road was the closest thing I had to peace. I've seen deserts swallow highways, forests swallow sunlight, and silence swallow men. And if there's one thing I've learned about camping alone across America, it's that the land remembers. Every vanished traveler, every unanswered call for help, it all lingers somewhere between the trees and the wind. That's what drew me to chase these disappearances in the first place. Not fame, not curiosity. Just the need to understand why certain campgrounds in the United States seem to take people and never give them back. When I started mapping the disappearances, I noticed something strange. Most of them happened at campgrounds that looked normal, clean, maintained, family-friendly even. But there was always one odd detail. Each was surrounded by deep wilderness, patches of land unaccounted for on modern maps where no cell service reached and compasses spun lazy circles. I'd been staying near White Ash Campground in northern New Mexico, a place with only 6 sites, each spaced far apart among old pines that looked older than the road itself. Locals said it used to be a mining camp in the early 1900s, but the company that ran it left after several workers went missing. When the government turned the area into a recreation site, it gained a new reputation, a quiet, overlooked gem, and a hotspot for lost voices. That phrase came from the ranger. He was a gaunt man, maybe in his 60s, with skin tanned to the color of bark and eyes that had seen too much. When I signed in at the gate, he leaned forward and said, "White Ash doesn't like to stay quiet for long. If you hear someone call your name at night, don't answer." I laughed it off at the time. That's what you do when people try to spook you. You laugh because it's easier than admitting the fear catches somewhere deep in your chest. The first night was peaceful enough. My RV was parked at Site 3 near the old riverbed. I built a small fire, brewed coffee, and watched the pines sway under a red sunset. The kind of calm that makes you forget the world's noise. I even recorded a few clips for my travel log, something I'd been doing for years, documenting safe camping habits and sharing survival advice. But at around midnight, I woke to something soft and rhythmic outside my RV. It wasn't footsteps, more like whispers that rose and fell with the wind. I turned off the small fan beside my bed, trying to isolate the sound. It seemed to drift between the trees, like a conversation held too far away to understand. Then it shifted. The voices weren't just nearby, they were circling the RV. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and cracked open the door. Cold air rolled in, carrying a faint smell of damp soil and rust. My breath fogged the beam of light. Nothing moved. Not a leaf, not a branch. Just that whispering, fading in and out like static. I called out, "Hello?" And I swear for a split second the forest replied. Not an echo, an answer. The same word, the same tone, thrown back at me from deep inside the dark. I shut the door and locked it. Spent the rest of the night sitting in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the tree line. The voices eventually stopped, replaced by the ordinary quiet of the woods, but my pulse didn't slow until the sky started turning blue. The next morning, I walked over to Site 5. A couple had been camping there the night before. A red Chevy van, 2 chairs by the fire ring, a half-cooked meal on the grate. They were gone. The van was still there, keys in the ignition, but no sign of them anywhere. I reported it to the ranger station, and the same man looked at me with that tired expression again. "You sure they didn't pack up early?" "No," I told him. "Their food's still warm." He didn't write anything down, didn't call it in, just said, "White ash keeps what it wants." That night, I sat outside by the fire with my recorder running. I wanted proof. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was just the journalist in me that wouldn't quit, but I couldn't shake the sense that something out there was listening. The wind would die down completely at times, and in that dead silence, the forest would breathe. You could hear it, like a long exhale through the pines. Then I caught it again. A whisper. Clearer this time. It said, "Mark." My name. Twice, once soft, almost curious. The second time, closer, right behind me. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing by the firelight. No one. Just the chair, my mug, and the shadows stretching long across the dirt. I packed up within 10 minutes and drove the RV toward the exit road, but the gate was chained. The ranger's truck wasn't there, and when I checked my phone, I realized something that made my stomach twist. There was no signal, no GPS reading. The same coordinates kept flashing over and over again, 0.00.00. I spent that night parked by the gate with the headlights aimed at the forest. I thought maybe it was just some trick of the landscape, maybe my mind playing with fatigue. But around 2 a.m., the radio in my RV clicked on by itself. The static filled the cabin, then started to modulate, forming faint syllables like someone trying to speak through a bad connection. "Can't find way." Then another voice, higher, faster, desperate. "Don't answer it." I froze. The first voice came again. "Mark, help me." That's when I realized it was the woman from Site 5. Her voice cracked and faded like something underwater, breaking apart and returning in short gasps. We followed, light, not real. The static surged and both voices vanished. By dawn, I found tire tracks near the river. 2 sets, one that matched the Chevy van and another much older, pressed deep into the dirt like something heavy had moved there decades ago. They led into the woods where the map showed nothing but blank space. I followed them for maybe 100 feet before the air turned heavy. Not fog, not smoke. Something thicker, like the humidity you feel before a storm, but colder. It had that same iron scent from the night before. My vision blurred slightly like heat haze in winter. Then I saw the van, half sunk into the earth. Doors open, headlights off. The interior was filled with water up to the seats, even though the river was hundreds of feet away. And inside on the driver's seat was a cassette recorder. I reached for it, and before I even hit play, I heard a faint tapping from the trees behind me. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Then silence. The tape began to hiss, and a woman's voice, hers, said something I'll never forget. "They said the woods remember the names. That's why we stopped saying ours." I stumbled backward, dropped the recorder, and ran. The air behind me rippled like something unseen moving fast, but when I reached the RV, everything was still. Birds sang again. The sun was warm. It was as if the night before had been a hallucination. I left White Ash that morning. The gate was open when I returned, and the ranger's truck was gone. I drove all the way to Santa Fe before stopping, but when I checked my dashcam footage, every clip from that night was corrupted. All except one. At the 12-minute mark, right before the camera cuts, you can see a shape standing by my campfire. A silhouette, thin, tall, its head tilted like it was listening. And then, faintly from the audio, you hear it whisper, "Don't forget your name, Mark." For weeks after I left White Ash Campground, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that same voice, that same whisper repeating my name from somewhere just beyond reach. It wasn't loud, it never was, but it crawled under my skin like a thought I couldn't get rid of. I tried convincing myself that exhaustion had warped my memory. Maybe it was carbon monoxide buildup or an overactive imagination stirred by isolation. But the rationalizations only lasted until I started hearing about other places. Campgrounds across the U.S. where people vanished under nearly identical circumstances. There was one in Colorado, near the base of the San Juan Mountains, where a father and son disappeared after hearing voices in the night. Another in Oregon, by Crater Lake, where campers reported echoes calling their names in the fog. And one near Lake Guntersville, Alabama, where 3 hikers were found weeks later, barefoot and dazed, claiming they had followed the singing trees. I began collecting these accounts, piecing together what I called the Lost Voices map. I marked every site where someone disappeared under conditions that didn't make sense. No animal tracks, no evidence of abduction, no blood, no struggle. Just sudden, clean absence. The pattern that formed chilled me. Each location was built on or near what locals described as abandoned sound mines. Places where echoes behaved wrong. Some were canyons, others valleys or dense forests where sound traveled farther than it should. The phenomenon wasn't recorded in official geology maps, but the locals knew, and they spoke of the same rule. If you hear a voice that shouldn't be there, don't answer it. So, naturally, I broke that rule again. The next site I investigated was in northern Utah, a small campground off a dirt road near the Green River Basin. Locals called it Echo Bend. The name should have been warning enough. When I arrived, the campground was empty. 6 sites like white ash. A broken sign, half buried in sand, read, "Quiet hours begin at dusk." It felt wrong from the start. The silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was tense, almost expectant. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The river nearby barely made a sound, though I could see the current moving. I parked my RV in the center site, left the engine idling, and took a walk with my recorder. The trail curved along the basin wall, revealing fossil marks etched into stone like ribs of some long-dead animal. There were boot prints, too. Fresh ones. They led toward a cluster of cottonwoods and then just stopped, as if the person had stepped off the edge of the earth. That night, the voices returned. It started with a whistle, one long, two short, like a signal. Then came the murmurs, different from white ash, softer, more rhythmic, as if repeating something in unison. And then, unmistakably, a child's voice, "Help me." The words were fragile, carried on the wind. I froze by the campfire, gripping my flashlight, staring into the shadows between the cottonwoods. The voice came again, closer. "Please, I'm lost." Everything in me wanted to respond. It was instinct, human decency. But that ranger's warning from New Mexico echoed in my head. Don't answer it. So I didn't. I just listened. The sound circled the campsite. The child's voice changed pitch as it moved, growing lower, older, until it wasn't a child at all. "Mark." My skin went cold. That's when I realized whatever these voices were, they remembered. They carried memory like static holding a frequency long after the source was gone. I shut off the fire, locked the doors, and sat inside the RV, recorder running. The temperature dropped suddenly, the windshield fogged over from the inside. Through the glass, I could see faint shapes moving along the edge of the light, blurred silhouettes, as though the dark itself had depth. At 1:47 a.m., something tapped the rear window. Not once, but 3 times. Slow, deliberate. I turned, and there, barely visible through the frost, was a handprint. Small, too small to belong to an adult. I lifted my camera and snapped a photo. When the flash went off, the figure vanished. But when I looked at the image, there was something behind the glass. A pale reflection, eyes like mirrors. The whisper came again, from inside the RV this time. "You shouldn't have come back." I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, sunlight poured through the blinds and the air was heavy with the smell of wet metal. My recorder had stopped at 2 or 3 a.m., the battery completely drained despite being plugged in. When I stepped outside, I found something carved into the dirt beside the campfire. Letters written with a stick, uneven but clear. Echoes don't forget. I left Echo Bend that morning and drove north until the desert turned to forest. But everywhere I went after that, something followed. At a rest stop outside Idaho Falls, I heard my name whispered from a drainage tunnel. In Montana, while refueling, the station radio cut through a gospel song to broadcast a single word: Mark. By then, I'd stopped recording. I didn't want evidence anymore. I just wanted peace. But when I tried to ignore it, the voices grew bolder. They'd call from behind motel walls, from trees outside my window, from the static of my phone. Always calm, always patient, as if waiting for me to answer again. That's when I realized what had been gnawing at me since White Ash. Those who vanish, they're not taken by force. They follow. Something in those voices doesn't command, it invites. It tempts the way memory does. They sound like people you've lost, people you miss, calling softly through the dark. And once you step past that first whisper, it doesn't matter where your feet go. The land rearranges itself around you. I started reaching out to families of the missing. A woman in Oregon told me her husband's last voicemail said, "I think I found them." His phone pinged once more that night from the edge of Crater Lake, then never again. A retired ranger from Colorado confessed that he once heard his deceased brother calling from the canyon floor. He nearly climbed down before realizing his brother had died 20 years earlier. Each story felt like a thread connecting to something larger, an intelligence older than the maps, something woven into the land itself. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't stop searching. Because sometimes, when the night's quiet enough, I hear a voice that doesn't sound like a stranger. It sounds like someone I used to know, my wife, who died 6 years ago in a car accident. She calls from the dark, soft as the wind, saying, "You don't have to be alone out there." That's what scares me most, because I want to believe her. The fear isn't just of being taken. It's the fear that part of me wants to go. That part of me already belongs to that silence, that I've been walking toward it all along. When I camp now, I keep the fire small, the windows covered, the radio unplugged, but every so often I catch my reflection in the glass and see another version of myself standing behind me, tired, hollow-eyed, whispering something I can't quite hear. Maybe the voices don't come from outside. Maybe they're what's left of us when the wild finally gets its way. I kept telling myself I wouldn't go back, but the map I'd made of the disappearances sat folded on my dashboard like a living thing, pulsing at the edge of my vision every time I drove. Each pin was another place where a person had heard a name in the dark and stepped forward. Each pin felt like a question mark aimed at me. One night, parked outside a grocery store in Missoula, I spread the map across the RV table and started tracing the pins with my finger. That's when I noticed the center point. The middle of all of it wasn't White Ash or Echo Bend. It was an even older site, one I'd never dared to visit, Larkspur Hollow Campground, deep in the Bitterroot Mountains. Every old ranger I'd interviewed mentioned it in hushed tones. "That's where it starts," one had said. The first lost voices. The campground had been closed to the public for decades, but some part of me already knew I was going. When I reached the forest road 2 days later, there was no sign, no gate, just a narrow track swallowed by trees. I parked a half-mile down, killed the engine, and listened. The air was still, but the silence had weight, like a room after an argument. I hiked in with only a small pack, a flashlight, and my recorder. The trail wound between ancient firs, their bark mottled with pale lichen like old scars. The further I went, the less my GPS worked. By the time I saw the first abandoned fire ring, the coordinates on my phone were all zeros again. The campground itself was little more than a clearing. 6 stone circles, overgrown picnic tables, a sign hanging crooked from one chain, Larkspur Hollow. Letters carved underneath in a shaky hand read, "No names after dark." It felt like stepping into a memory. Everything around me hummed with a faint vibration, too low to hear, but strong enough to feel in my ribs. My hands shook as I set up the recorder. I sat at one of the tables and waited. For hours, nothing happened. The forest looked ordinary. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. And then, just as I thought I'd been wrong, the first voice came. Mark, soft, right behind my ear. I turned, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing. Then again from the tree line. Mark. And another. Help me. And another. Follow. The voices overlapped, layered like an echo chamber filled with names, pleas, fragments of lost conversations. They weren't just calling me, they were calling each other, as though hundreds of people were trapped in some invisible corridor between the trees. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from standing. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my body stayed rooted, waiting for some pattern to reveal itself. That's when the temperature dropped. Not a breeze, not a draft, just sudden cold like opening a freezer door. My breath fogged. Shapes began to form at the edge of the clearing. Not people, not exactly. They were outlines, grayish, translucent, flickering like film burned too long in the projector. Some knelt as though warming their hands at a phantom fire. Some reached out as if searching for something. None had faces I could see. One of them turned its head toward me. It spoke without moving its mouth. The sound came from everywhere at once. You came back to where it began. I couldn't speak. My voice caught somewhere in my throat. Another shape stepped closer, taller than the rest. Its head tilted at that same listening angle I'd seen in my dash cam footage from White Ash. You followed the map, it said. The map leads inward. My recorder clicked off by itself. I forced myself to ask, "What are you?" The voices answered in unison, layered over each other like a chorus through static. "We are what remains when you answer." Every hair on my body rose. The tall figure raised an arm and pointed toward the far end of the clearing, where the darkness between the trees seemed thicker, more solid. I followed its gesture with my light and saw a trail leading deeper in, a trail I hadn't noticed before. At the entrance stood an old signpost. The paint had peeled, but the words were still legible. This way home. My heart hammered. The shapes around me began to sway as if encouraging, coaxing. A low hum filled my ears, vibrating through my skull. Behind the hum, another voice rose, the one I'd been dreading, my wife's. "Mark, come on, I'm here." Her voice broke me. It wasn't the hollow imitation I'd heard in Utah or New Mexico. It was her. The exact timbre, the warmth, the little hitch in her breath when she said my name. I stood up without meaning to. My flashlight trembled in my grip. The trail yawned open, a black mouth lined with trees like teeth. "Mark," she whispered again. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Tears blurred my vision. My chest ached with longing. I took a single step toward the path. The cold air wrapped around me like arms. Then another voice, sharper, urgent, cutting through everything. "Don't answer it." I froze. It was the same warning I'd heard through the radio at White Ash. A man's voice this time. Desperate. "Don't answer. Don't follow. It's not them." The humming grew louder. The shapes flickered, distorting, stretching. My wife's voice turned pleading. "Please, Mark, it's safe here. It's home." I realized then what this place was. A crossroads of every whisper, every echo that had ever been answered. A snare woven out of memory and longing. It didn't take you by force. It lured you until you stepped willingly into its hollow. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "You're not her," I said. "You're not her." The voice changed mid-syllable, deepening into a guttural hiss. "You already belong to us." The shapes lurched closer. The cold became suffocating. My flashlight flickered and died. I turned and ran. The trail behind me seemed to stretch, twisting into new shapes. Trees blurred, the ground tilted. The humming followed like a swarm of bees inside my skull. Hands, or the memory of hands, brushed my back as I sprinted through the dark. Somewhere ahead, faint and flickering, I saw my RV headlights. I ran harder, lungs burning, the cold clawing at my skin. The voices shrieked now, overlapping in a cacophony of names and pleas. "Mark, stay! Mark, come back! Mark, Mark!" I slammed into the RV door, wrenched it open, and dove inside. The engine roared to life on the first turn, though I hadn't touched the key. I floored the accelerator, wheels spitting gravel as I tore down the forest road. In the rearview mirror, the clearing receded, swallowed by the trees. For a heartbeat, I saw the tall figure standing at the edge of the road, head tilted, watching. Then it vanished. The voices didn't follow me out of the forest that night, but something did. When I stopped at a gas station 2 hours later, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a second, it wasn't me looking back. It was a version of me thinner, hollow-eyed, lips moving silently as though whispering to someone just beyond the glass. And then it smiled. I didn't drive far that night, just far enough to convince myself I'd escaped something, even if I didn't believe it. I pulled off at a small rest area near the Idaho border and sat behind the wheel, engine running, headlights carving a tunnel through the fog. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound outside felt deliberate. The drip of water from the roof, the pop of cooling metal, the faint rustle of wind through grass. It wasn't until I turned off the ignition that I realized how quiet the world had become. No trucks passing on the interstate. No insects. Just the soft hum of my own heartbeat echoing in the cabin. When I finally worked up the nerve to look in the rearview mirror again, I saw only my reflection, sweat-soaked, pale, but mine. Still, I slept sitting upright in the driver's seat, keys in hand, as if I might need to leave again at any second. I dreamt of the voices, not calling me this time, but whispering to each other. Planning, like they'd found a new way in. When I woke, the dawn was gray and hollow, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything. My mouth tasted of metal. My throat was dry, as though I'd been breathing through dust all night. And then I saw it. On the passenger seat, where I'd left nothing before, lay a small piece of paper, folded once, neatly. My name written on the outside in unfamiliar handwriting. For a long time I didn't move, just stared, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone. Finally I reached for it. Inside, in letters shaky but unmistakable, it read, "The voices follow the ones who listen." That was it. No signature. No clue how it got there. The locks on the RV were untouched. I wanted to throw it away, to burn it. But some part of me knew it wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. I spent the next few days driving without a destination. I'd start in one direction, lose nerve halfway, turn around, and drive back. I kept thinking of what the tall shape had said. You followed the map. The map leads inward. Maybe this wasn't about geography anymore. Maybe the land wasn't where the voices lived. Maybe they'd been using me all along, as a vessel, a way out. The sign started small, my reflection flickering for half a second longer than it should. The faint echo of footsteps behind me when I stopped for gas, my own voice whispering words I hadn't spoken. Then came the radio. It turned on by itself one evening while I was parked by a lake, static filling the cabin in slow waves. I reached to shut it off, but before my fingers touched the dial, a voice broke through. Not a stranger's. Mine. You shouldn't have left. I froze. The voice was unmistakably my own. Same tone, same breath. Then, overlapping it, came another, my wife's. You promised we'd see the coast. I stared at the radio, a hollow buzzing growing in my chest. The voices grew clearer, weaving together, almost melodic. They weren't just speaking, they were replaying. Like the air around me was rewinding memories I'd tried to bury. I grabbed the recorder, hands trembling, and hit record. Who are you? I asked aloud. What do you want from me? The static pulsed, then settled into one steady voice. Mine again, distorted, deeper. We are what you left behind. I slammed the recorder off. The radio went dead. Outside, the lake rippled though there was no wind. I saw my reflection in the black water, but it didn't move when I did. It just smiled, same as before. I couldn't stay there. I drove until nightfall, the highway stretching like a silver thread through endless darkness. But wherever I stopped, the whispers found me. Sometimes in the hum of the tires, sometimes in the static of the CB radio, and sometimes now inside my own head. At first, it was just words, fragments, my name, my wife's name, places I'd camped. But lately, it's been whole sentences, coherent thoughts that feel like mine but aren't. We should go back. You know they're waiting. You can't leave them there. I started recording myself every morning just to make sure I still sounded like me. But even those tapes began to change. A few seconds of silence at the end, then breathing. Deep, slow, too close to the mic. And then one morning, I played back a tape and heard something new. My voice saying words I never spoke. Tonight, we'll finish it. That was when I knew I had to go back to Larkspur Hollow. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. Whatever had attached itself to me wanted to return, to complete whatever cycle I'd interrupted. And maybe if I faced it where it began, I could end it. The drive back through the Bitterroot Range felt like traveling through a wound. The forest was darker than I remembered, the air heavier. I parked at the same spot, grabbed my flashlight and recorder, and stepped into the trees. No wind this time. No distant hum. Just that unbearable quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. When I reached the clearing, it looked unchanged. The fire rings, the tilted sign, the air thick as before. I turned on the recorder. My voice came out unsteady. I came back. I want to understand. For a long moment, nothing. Then, softly, the forest breathed out. The whisper came, familiar as my own thoughts. You shouldn't have left us behind. Shapes emerged again, faint light bending around them. But they weren't distant this time. They were standing closer, more defined. And in the center, my wife's outline stepped forward. "Mark," she said, smiling the way she used to before everything fell apart. "You did good. You found your way home." I took a step back. "You're not her." Her smile didn't fade. "Then why do I remember the coast? Why do I remember the ring you dropped in the sand?" My chest tightened. Those were memories I'd never told anyone, not even in my recordings. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Because," she said, "we're what you left echoing." The ground beneath my feet began to hum. The trees around the clearing shimmered faintly, as though vibrating. The air grew denser, heavy with something electric. My recorder flicked on by itself. From the speaker, my own voice played back, whispering words I hadn't recorded yet. "You can't escape what remembers you." I dropped the recorder. It hit the ground with a sharp click, but the playback didn't stop. The voices multiplied, layering over one another. Mine, my wife's, the strangers from White Ash and Echo Bend, all speaking in unison. We are what's left of the names. The forest began to bend inward. Shadows stretched toward me like reaching arms. I stumbled back, flashlight flickering. Every direction looked the same. Every sound was my own voice calling out from somewhere else. "Mark," they said, hundreds of times, overlapping, deafening. "Mark, Mark, Mark." Then for the first time I shouted back, "Stop!" Everything went silent. Every shape froze, every echo halted mid-breath. Even the hum beneath my feet stopped. In that silence, one last whisper rose, barely audible. "Now we know where you are." The world tilted. The flashlight fell from my hand, and in the beam's final flicker, I saw the reflection again. My own face, standing across from me in the dark, whispering my name with a smile that wasn't mine. I don't remember leaving the clearing. The next thing I knew, I was back in the RV, engine idling, headlights burning holes through the fog. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white. I was drenched in sweat. The forest outside was silent. No wind, no whispers, just stillness, like the world had hit pause. I looked around, half expecting one of those shapes to be sitting beside me, but it was just me, alone. Or at least that's what I told myself. Then the radio clicked on again. I didn't touch it this time. The dial spun by itself, passing through frequencies until it landed on a low hum that matched the rhythm of my pulse. For a second, I thought it was feedback, until I heard it. A single breath. Mine. Then another. Then my voice, whispering. "You shouldn't have come back here, Mark." I slammed my hand over the power button, but the hum continued even after the radio died. It wasn't coming from the speakers, it was inside the cabin. Inside me. I stepped out into the night. The air was thick, the mist hanging low to the ground. My flashlight barely reached 10 feet ahead. The forest wasn't empty anymore. It felt crowded, like something invisible was watching from every angle. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, crunching gravel with the same rhythm as mine. I turned the light, but no one was there. When I moved again, they followed, always the same distance behind. "Stop," I said out loud. The footsteps stopped. A moment later, I heard the exact same word, my own voice, spoken from the darkness. "Stop." It wasn't an echo. It came after me. Every instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself to walk toward the sound. The fog parted slightly, and I saw it, my reflection again, standing in the middle of the road, pale, unmoving, its head tilted the same way as the figure from White Ash, the same as the tall one at Larkspur Hollow. I raised the flashlight. "What are you?" I said. The reflection smiled. "I'm the one who answered." It stepped closer, its movements fluid but wrong, like a recording slightly out of sync. "You called back," it said. "Every whisper, every night you stayed to listen, you built the bridge." My heart hammered. A bridge to what? To us, to what the land remembers. You gave us shape again. The fog thickened around it, twisting into faint silhouettes. The faces I'd seen before, the shapes from the campground, all flickering in and out like dying film reels. They weren't just echoes, they were impressions of memory, caught between worlds. The reflection, my other self, extended its hand. "You can stop running now. The ones who disappear aren't gone, Mark. They just stop resisting. They let the silence hold them." I felt something stir inside me, some strange, sorrowful pull. It wasn't fear anymore. It was longing. Because in that voice I heard all the things I missed, my wife's laughter, the comfort of being known, the peace of not fighting anymore. It stepped closer. The distance between us shrank until I could see every detail of its face. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't even evil. It was tired, familiar, like looking into a mirror that remembered things I didn't want to. "Come home," it said. "The world forgets you anyway, but we remember." For a moment, I almost did it. I almost reached out. And then, faint but real, I heard another sound, the wind. The first wind I'd heard in hours, whistling through the pines like a breath of the living world. It carried a single phrase, spoken in my wife's real voice this time. "Not yet." Something in me broke loose. I stumbled backward, shaking my head, gasping for air like I'd been underwater too long. "No," I said. "You're not her. You're nothing." The reflection's expression shifted. No anger, no pain, just disappointment. "You'll be back," it whispered. "They all come back, because the silence never stops calling." And then it vanished. The fog scattered. The forest exhaled. I don't know how long I sat on the road after that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. When I finally started the RV again, the engine sounded wrong, like it was struggling to remember how to run. The headlights flickered but stayed on long enough to guide me down the mountain. I didn't look in the mirrors, not once. By sunrise, I was back on the main highway, the radio silent, the world returning to its ordinary self. The hum of the tires was comforting again, steady, mechanical, alive. I told myself I was done. No more chasing disappearances, no more whispers. I'd sell the RV, find a small apartment somewhere quiet, forget all of it. But when I stopped for coffee that morning, I noticed something carved into the condensation on the inside of my window. 4 words: "We never forget names." I wiped it away, but the outline remained faintly visible in the glass, no matter how many times I tried. That was months ago. Since then, I've tried to return to normal life, if you can call this normal. I still hear faint whispers sometimes, especially near water or in the woods, always soft, always patient. They never force themselves on me. They just wait. Sometimes I record them out of habit. Most nights I don't even bother listening back. But the last time I did, the tape ended with my own voice, calm, collected, saying something I don't remember recording. "Another one's gone missing." They followed the sound. It's not just me anymore. The disappearances are spreading. Every news story I read online, every camper who vanishes without a trace, the pattern grows clearer. The voices aren't confined to one campground. They're moving along the same roads we drive, the same airwaves we use to talk, the same memories we cling to. Maybe they were never tied to the land at all. Maybe they were always tied to us. I still travel, though not like before. I stick to crowded parks, avoid the deep wilderness. I keep the radio off, the recorder buried in a drawer. But when the night gets too quiet, when the fog starts to roll in and the fire burns low, I swear I can feel it again, that faint pull in the back of my mind, the whisper that says my name not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a promise. And sometimes, when I'm too tired to fight it, I whisper back. Just once, just to feel less alone. That's when I see the shape again, far down the road, waiting patiently in the beam of my headlights, head tilted, listening. And I know the truth now. The lost voices aren't calling us from somewhere else. They're calling from what's already inside us, the part that never learned how to stop listening. If you ever camp alone and the night grows so quiet that you can hear your own thoughts echo, do yourself one favor. Don't answer. Because once you do, they'll remember your name too. The first thing you notice when you cross into the Tongass isn't the cold, it's the silence that follows you. It's not an ordinary kind of quiet, not the kind that comes when you turn off your phone or shut a door. This silence has weight to it. It hangs in the air like fog. It listens. It waits. I'd been camping in my Volkswagen bus for almost a month by then, taking the coastal route from Washington up through British Columbia and into Alaska, recording my travels for a small community of van lifers who followed my channel. I told them I wanted to see how far north I could go before the loneliness changed me. But I think the truth was, I wanted to find something. Maybe peace. Maybe answers. Maybe punishment. I parked at a small clearing near the edge of a mossy slope overlooking a narrow river. My Volkswagen, a faded blue '78 Westphalia I'd named June, fit perfectly between two Sitka spruces. Their trunks were thick, their roots tangled and old, gnarled like hands that had been reaching through the soil for centuries. The rain had been light that day, soft enough that I could hear it tapping the metal roof like distant drumming. The forest around me breathed in mist and exhaled silence. A few hours before dusk, I decided to hike a short loop near the camp. I followed a trail marked by hand-carved wooden signs, half of them unreadable under years of moss. The deeper I went, the darker it got, not just from the clouds, but from the canopy itself. The trees in Tongass don't just grow tall. They grow heavy, layered, woven together like walls. I remember hearing my own breath echo in strange ways, bouncing off trunks that seemed too close, too aware. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I heard it for the first time. My name, Eli. It wasn't loud, not a shout, but close, like someone whispering from a few feet behind me. I froze, turning in a slow circle, nothing but the wet shuffle of leaves. I thought it must have been an animal sound, distorted by the trees. My rational brain cataloged every possibility. Wind, birds, the pop of tree bark expanding in the cold. Still, I found myself whispering back, "Who's there?" My own voice sounded strange in that forest, swallowed before it could carry. That night, I lit my lantern inside the Volkswagen and tried to laugh it off. I made dinner, recorded a short vlog entry about how creepy the forest felt. My audience loved that stuff. Remote camping spots, weird folklore, the thrill of being isolated. I played it up a little, mentioned the voice, and joked that maybe the Tongass had ghosts. Then I signed off, closed my laptop, and sat listening to the rain deepen into a steady drumming. Somewhere outside, in the rhythm of that rain, I heard my name again. Faint. Drawn out. "Ellie?" I froze. The hair on my arms lifted. I turned off the lantern and listened, heart hammering. The sound came again, not closer this time, but clearer, like the forest had found a frequency it could use. There was something almost deliberate about it. It didn't sound angry or ghostly. It sounded curious. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there under my sleeping bag, counting every creak of the van, every drip of water, waiting for the voice to return. It didn't, but the feeling it left behind stayed. An ache in my chest, like I was being watched through the fogged-up glass. By morning, the air had shifted. The rain had stopped, and the forest looked washed clean. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, fatigue, too much caffeine, and too much solitude. I decided to stay another night, just to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. That afternoon, I met a man named Ryan, a local fisherman who'd pulled up near the river in an old pickup. He was in his 40s, quiet, friendly, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen every kind of weather. When I mentioned the voice, he didn't laugh. He just looked at the trees for a long time, then said, "This forest has memory. You ever been somewhere that remembers things it shouldn't?" I told him no. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Tongass remembers. It holds on to what people bring here. Grief, guilt, names. It all echoes back. Some folks say the trees talk, but it ain't the trees, not really. It's the land learning your voice. I laughed it off, but there was something in his tone that kept me quiet afterward. When he left, I watched his truck disappear down the muddy road, and the silence returned, pressing against the windows of the van like fog. That evening, I tried to distract myself by carving a small mark into one of the nearby trees. A simple E with my knife, just a small act of defiance against the feeling that the forest was closing in. But as I pressed the blade into the bark, I felt an odd resistance, almost like cutting into flesh. The sap that oozed out smelled metallic, bitter. I wiped it off, stepped back, and felt stupid for even doing it. Still, it gave me a small sense of control, a reminder that I was the only human out there. That night, the whispers returned, not just my name this time. Words. Broken phrases I couldn't understand, sliding between the patter of rain and wind. It felt like someone outside the van was pacing, circling, brushing against the metal panels. I sat there in the dark, gripping my pocket knife, listening to the subtle creaks as something or someone moved around June. The voice came again. "Eli, don't." The sound was right against the window now, soft as breath. I turned my head slowly, every instinct in me screaming not to. But I did, and through the fogged glass I saw the faint outline of a face. Morning came slow, gray, unreal. When I finally stepped outside, the world looked untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The ground was wet but still, and my reflection stared back from the side of the van like I'd dreamt the whole thing. But when I turned toward the tree where I'd carved the E, I felt my stomach drop. There were more carvings, dozens of them. They covered the bark in tight, jagged lines. My handwriting, my pressure, my rhythm, every mark matched mine perfectly. But they weren't just letters now. They formed words. Eli is gone. Eli doesn't listen. Eli dies here. I stumbled back, my hand trembling. My first thought was that someone had done it to mess with me. Maybe Ryan. Maybe someone watching my videos online, some twisted fan who'd followed me here, but the carvings were still oozing fresh sap. They hadn't been there last night. I took photos, packed my gear, and decided to leave. But as I turned the ignition, the engine only sputtered. Once, twice, then nothing. June wouldn't start. I tried again, hands shaking, still nothing. The air inside the van felt heavier, thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the damp air, and that's when I noticed something else. The forest wasn't silent anymore. There was a low hum, like 1,000 bees buried deep in the trees. It wasn't coming from one direction, but from everywhere at once. The sound vibrated through the ground, through my shoes, through my bones. I started walking toward the main road. The path was narrow, winding, but familiar enough. Yet every step I took, the forest seemed to shift. Trees that had been straight were bent now. The moss underfoot felt slicker, deeper. The hum followed me. Then again, my name, Eli. But this time it was my own voice. I stopped mid-step. The sound had come from the left, maybe 30 feet into the trees, but I knew it was me. My tone, my cadence, even the way I breathed between syllables. Eli, it called again, lower now. The forest swallowed the echo. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint it. Every instinct told me to keep walking toward the road, but something inside me, the part that wanted to understand, dragged my feet off the trail. I stepped over fallen branches slick with moss, deeper into the dark. The air felt colder the farther I went. My breath came out in quick bursts, steaming and shallow. The trees here grew tighter together, their trunks twisted, roots breaking through the ground like veins. The smell of sap was strong, sweet, sour, metallic. I passed another tree with carvings on it. My name again. The same shape, the same tilt of the letters. I pressed my fingers against the grooves, feeling the cold wetness of the sap run down my hand. Then I saw it, something glinting a few feet ahead. A blade. My knife, the one I'd left in the van. It was stuck in the side of a spruce trunk, half buried in fresh cuts. The bark around it was etched with a spiral pattern, uneven, frantic. I pulled the knife free, heart pounding, and when I stepped back, I noticed the carvings formed words again. Don't go back. That's when I heard movement behind me, slow, deliberate steps pressing into the soft ground. I spun around. Nothing, just the dark green layers of forest and the shifting fog. I started backing away, one hand tight on the knife, eyes scanning every shadow. Eli. The voice said again. My voice. Closer now, clearer. And then, from somewhere behind the trees, I saw a figure step forward. It wasn't a man exactly, not the way we understand it. It was my height, wearing my jacket, moving like me, but wrong. The head tilted too far to one side, the body slightly delayed in its motions, as though it were remembering how to be human. The thing stood just beyond the light that broke through the branches, and even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was smiling. I ran. Branches tore at my sleeves, roots caught my boots. I didn't look back. I just ran until I burst out into the clearing where June waited, sitting still between those two old spruces. I jumped inside, slammed the door, locked it, and sat there in the driver's seat, gasping for air. The knife was still in my hand. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale and distorted, the veins in my neck pulsing like trapped wires. Then from outside the van, the voice came again, soft, close to the window. Eli, come see. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Something brushed against the metal siding, once, twice, then a pause. Eli, it whispered again, but this time the sound came from inside. I spun around, scanning the dark. My lantern sat on the floor near the sleeping bag. I reached down with trembling hands, flicked it on, and froze. Across the inside wall of the van, in thick streaks of sap and dirt, were the same words carved into the trees. Eli dies here. I dropped the lantern. The light rolled across the floor, flickering as it spun. That was when the banging started. Slow at first, then faster. Fists or palms slapping against the sides of June from every direction. The sound came from all around me, a dozen hands beating in rhythm, shaking the metal. Stop! I shouted, slamming my fists into the dashboard. What do you want? The noise stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Outside, the forest exhaled. I could hear the faint hum again, that low vibration crawling through the trees. The fog outside the windshield was thicker now, clinging to the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shape walking between the trees, slow, steady, moving toward the van. I turned the key again. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then roared to life. I didn't think. I just slammed the gas. Mud sprayed behind the tires as I tore down the narrow dirt road, headlights slicing through the fog. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look into the mirrors, afraid of what I might see behind me. It took me nearly an hour to reach the main highway. When I finally saw the cracked asphalt and the faint orange glow of a distant gas station, my chest loosened just enough to breathe. I parked under the fluorescent lights, left the engine running, and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, listening to the rain return in a soft, rhythmic patter. For a while, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The carvings, the face, the voice. Isolation plays tricks on people. I'd read about that. I told myself it was exhaustion, paranoia, the forest echoing sounds in strange ways. I even recorded another video later that night, talking about the experience, half confession, half performance. I called it The Forest That Spoke My Name. My viewers loved it. Thousands of comments poured in. People told me how real it felt, how scared they'd been. But the next morning, I decided to drive back, just to prove I wasn't losing it. When I reached the clearing, something was different. The trees stood the same, the air was still, but June, my Volkswagen, wasn't there. My heart dropped. I parked on the side of the trail and walked in, every step echoing in that heavy silence. There was no van, no tire tracks, nothing. Only the stump of the tree I'd carved into and a pile of rotted wood beside it that looked like something had been sitting there for years. I walked closer, stomach twisting. The air smelled thick and wet, like decay. And there, carved into the nearest tree in deep, blackened grooves, were the same words, but older now, edges softened by time and moss. Eli dies here, except below it, freshly cut, was another line. The same handwriting, my handwriting. Comes back. My legs went weak. I backed away, tripping over a root, catching myself against another trunk. My hand brushed something rough. I turned and saw more carvings, spiraling up the bark like a timeline. Each one had a date, each one years apart, and each one was signed by me. I don't remember leaving. I just remember the sound, the whisper of my own voice chasing me through the trees, overlapping itself, hundreds of versions of me whispering from every direction. Eli, Eli, don't forget. When I reached the van, it was there again, sitting in the same place it had been before, covered in dew. The knife was on the dashboard. My bag was zipped. Everything exactly as I'd left it. I climbed in, shaking, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the forest pressing against the glass. I started the engine and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the ferry station in Ketchikan. I bought a ticket south and slept in the van until dawn. That night, as the ferry drifted away from the dock, I stood on the deck and looked back at the tree line fading into the fog. I wanted to believe I'd escaped it, that what happened in Tongass would stay there. But when I opened my glove compartment later to grab my passport, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A small piece of bark. Carved into it in the same jagged letters were the words, "We remember." And underneath it, faint but unmistakable, my own signature. I stared at that piece of bark until the ferry lights flickered off the water, until the engine's hum turned into a lullaby of metal and tide. My hands shook as I held it, not because it was frightening in itself, but because the bark was fresh. Not damp from the rain, not brittle or dry. It was newly cut, as if the forest had followed me aboard. I threw it over the railing, watched it drift away, swallowed by the black current below. But even as I watched, the reflection of the ferry's lights caught the bark as it turned, and for a split second I swore I saw something move in it. A faint shimmer, like an eye opening in the grain. Then the waves took it. For the rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I parked June in the lower deck, locked the doors, and sat awake in the driver's seat as the ferry carried us through the inside passage. Every sound, the groan of metal, the slap of water against the hull, felt like breath, like whispers trying to form words beneath the hum of the engines. I told myself I was imagining it, that the brain can replay fear like a bad recording, looping it until you start to believe it's happening again. But sometime past midnight, I heard a knock. It came from inside the van. Just one. A hollow tap from behind the rear cabinet where I kept my tools. Then silence. My pulse jumped into my throat. I turned slowly, flashlight in hand, and crouched by the back. The air inside June felt colder than it should have. I unlatched the cabinet door, bracing myself for a mouse, a loose wrench, anything ordinary. What I found instead made my stomach twist. A thin strip of bark lay inside, wet, curled, freshly torn. The smell hit me instantly, sap and salt, mixed with the faint coppery tang of blood. On the inside of the bark, scrawled in a line of dark resin, were 5 words. "You carved first," we answered. My flashlight slipped from my hand. It clattered on the floor, the beams swinging wildly across the van's interior. The windows fogged as I breathed faster, my breath clouding the glass from the inside out. Outside, I could hear the faint shuffle of waves, but under it, another sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps on metal. Someone, or something, was walking along the ferry deck. I turned off the light, crouched low, and listened. The steps stopped outside the van. Then came a slow dragging sound, like something heavy brushing against the side. I froze, eyes locked on the thin line of fog forming along the window's edge. Then, soft as a sigh, "Eli." It was still my voice. Something brushed against the window, fingers or roots tracing shapes into the condensation. The letters formed slow, deliberate, backward from my side of the glass. "Come home." I pressed myself against the opposite wall, knife in hand, every muscle tight. Then, as suddenly as it started, the sound was gone. just the low rumble of the ferry again. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, the deck was empty, slick with sea mist. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the engine running, the headlights on, waiting for dawn. When the ferry reached the mainland, I drove. I didn't stop for food, didn't answer messages, didn't upload anything. I just drove south through the endless green of British Columbia, then Washington, Oregon, all the way down to Northern California. It wasn't until I reached a small campground near Mendocino that I finally stopped, exhausted. The ocean was calm there. The redwoods towered above the cliffs, steady and ancient, their trunks glowing in the evening sun. I thought maybe this was what I needed, a different forest, a clean slate. I parked June beneath a canopy of redwoods, opened the side door, and just breathed for a while. The smell was dry bark, ocean salt, and pine resin. Peaceful, familiar. I cooked dinner, turned on some quiet music, tried to feel normal again. For a few hours it worked. Then I noticed the carvings. Not on the trees this time, on June. The first one I saw was small near the handle of the sliding door, then another on the rear panel. By the time I circled around to the other side, I counted 5 distinct carvings, shallow but unmistakable. The same angular strokes, the same letters. We remember. I dropped to my knees beside the van, running my hands over the scratches. The metal felt warm beneath my fingertips, almost alive. My reflection in the chrome looked warped, stretched. And for the first time since leaving Tongass, I heard the forest again, not around me, but inside me. The low hum, buried deep in the chest, vibrating behind the ribs. It came back in pieces at first, the smell of the spruce, the sound of my name echoing through the mist, the words I'd carved into that first tree. E, a single letter, simple, harmless, or so I'd thought. I hadn't just marked the tree, I'd opened something. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing the truth that I'd been trying to deny ever since. The Tongass didn't haunt people because it wanted to scare them. It remembered them. It carried their voices, their anger, their loneliness, and by carving my mark into its skin, I'd given it mine to keep. That night, I built a fire by the ocean, hoping the salt air would drown the hum that had followed me. I pulled out my camera and recorded one last message, my voice shaking as I spoke into the lens. I don't know who'll find this, I said, but if you ever camp in the Tongass, if you hear your name called, don't answer. Don't carve. Don't leave a mark. The forest doesn't forget. I shut off the camera, threw it into the fire, and watched the lens crack and melt. The flames reflected in the van's windows, flickering like eyes. Then from inside June, the radio turned on by itself. The static hissed for a few seconds before a faint voice broke through. My own voice. Come home. I lunged forward, yanked the battery cable loose. The engine coughed once, then died. Everything went dark except for the firelight dancing on the metal. The van's panels began to creak softly, rhythmically, as though something inside them was breathing. I stepped back, the surf roaring behind me, the trees whispering above. Then I saw it, the reflection of the flames moving along the van's side, forming shapes, letters, words I couldn't ignore. The trees remember. I stumbled back until my heels hit the edge of the cliff. Below, the Pacific churned and crashed against black rock. I thought about running, about burning the van, erasing it all. But then I heard something behind me, wind moving through the trees like a whisper, or maybe hundreds of whispers layered together. And within that sound, clear as my own heartbeat, thank you for bringing us. The forest didn't just remember, it migrated. It had learned my voice, my movement, my scent. It carried me like a seed, and wherever I parked, it grew. Weeks later, when the rangers found my van near the Mendocino cliffs, the inside was empty. No sleeping bag, no clothes, no sign of a struggle. Just the same carvings circling the walls and ceiling in jagged patterns, layered over each other until they became unreadable. Except for one. Right above the driver's seat, etched deep into the metal, were the words, Eli came home. And if you stand in that spot today, long after the van's been taken to the Ranger impound lot, they say you can still hear something faint, like someone whispering your name when the wind moves through the redwoods just right. A voice, not yours, not mine, but something older, something that remembers. I've always believed that fear is a language, one that nature speaks fluently when you're far from city lights. My name's Ethan Cole, I'm 41, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades camping across the United States in a 30-foot Class C RV that's seen more midnight storms and empty dirt roads than most people see in a lifetime. Folks like to tell me I'm addicted to the road, but the truth is simpler. The road is the only place where I can hear myself think. Out there, beyond the hum of everyday life, you learn that silence has its own sound, and sometimes it whispers back. I started hearing those whispers the first time I camped at Black Mesa RV Park, a dusty, half-forgotten campground in Oklahoma's Panhandle. Locals warned me before I got there. You know that place isn't right. A man at the gas station told me, his hands trembling as he pumped diesel into my rig. I laughed it off, like most travelers do when people talk about haunted campgrounds, because I'd heard it all before. Ghost stories meant to keep tourists out, campfire myths spun from isolation. But as I'd come to learn, separating fact from fiction in the RV world isn't as simple as it sounds. Some fears are made up, but others grow quietly in the dark, waiting for you to park close enough to notice them. That night, the park was nearly empty. Just 3 rigs, mine, a beat-up Winnebago near the entrance, and what looked like a permanent residence camper down by the tree line. The air was dry, but the wind never stopped moving. It carried grit that stuck to my lips and a faint metallic tang like something burnt had soaked into the soil. I remember thinking how still everything looked, yet how restless it all felt. The cottonwoods creaking as if something heavy brushed past their trunks, the sand shifting like it was alive. People think the dangers of RV camping are obvious: theft, wild animals, bad weather, but those are just the surface-level risks. What really gets to you are the things that don't make sense, noises that don't follow a pattern, faces that don't look quite right in the glow of your own campfire, or a sense that someone's parked just out of view, though your rear view shows nothing but dark prairie. That first night, I locked the doors early and turned off my interior lights. There was no reason to, at least not one I could admit out loud. I cooked a can of chili on the stove, sat back in the small dinette, and listened to the wind beat against the aluminum siding. Then, through the static of the radio, a voice cut in, faint, like an old AM station bleeding through static. I twisted the dial, thinking maybe I'd caught some trucker chatter bouncing off the flatlands. But then the voice said my name. Ethan. I froze. It was drawn out, slow, like the wind itself was trying to shape the sound. I laughed, a nervous reflex. Just the wind, I said out loud, as if the air needed convincing. I switched off the radio, slid the window shut, and reminded myself that isolation does strange things to your head. I've read enough about sensory disorientation during long solo trips, how your mind starts to fill in blanks when silence stretches too long. But that didn't explain the footprints I found the next morning. The soil around my RV was soft from last week's rain, and there, just below the rear ladder, were bare human prints. No shoes, no tire marks, no indication of a second vehicle anywhere nearby. They trailed around the back and ended where the grass thinned out near the slope leading to the creek. That was the part that stuck with me. The prints ended. They didn't fade. They just stopped, as if the person who made them simply stepped out of existence. I didn't mention it to the park manager. He was an older guy named Randy, the kind who looked like he'd been built from dust and cigarette smoke. When I asked about the other RVs, he said the Winnebago left early that morning. Didn't even check out. As for the camper near the trees, he frowned. Ain't nobody in that one. Been abandoned 2 months now. Sheriff tagged it already. That's when I started to feel something different than fear. It was awareness, that creeping, unnerving shift where you realize maybe the fiction isn't the part you thought it was. Here's the truth most travelers won't tell you. RV parks aren't inherently dangerous. The danger lies in trusting familiarity. The picnic tables, fire rings, friendly hosts, they give you a false sense of safety. Because an RV, no matter how solid it feels, is just a thin shell of fiberglass between you and everything else. Once you start to feel that fragility, you can't unfeel it. Every creak becomes a question. Every gust of wind I feel like a presence testing the walls. I stayed another night. Call it curiosity or stubbornness, but I've never been good at running from what unsettles me. I set up my camp chair outside, poured a drink, and watched the sunset burn the horizon orange-red until it vanished behind the mesa. Then I waited. Sometimes, the best way to confront your fears is to let them come closer, to listen. Around midnight, I heard it again, the whisper. Only this time, it came from the direction of the abandoned camper. A rhythmic dragging sound followed it, something moving slow through the dirt. I stood up, flashlight trembling in my hand, and caught a shape in the beam. Just for a second. It wasn't a person. It was lowered to the ground, almost crawling, its skin pale like the underside of an arm pressed too long against glass. I shouted, and it froze. Then it smiled. Or at least, I think it did. That was enough. I locked myself inside the RV, shut every window, and sat in the driver's seat until dawn with the headlights off, the keys in my lap. When morning came, there was nothing. No prints, no trail, no proof. Just that same dry wind whispering through the weeds. That day, I drove out without looking back. But here's what I learned, and this is what I tell every traveler who asks me about RV park dangers. The real threat isn't what's hiding in the dark. It's what the dark reveals about you. Your fears, your doubts, the way your mind bends reality when isolation pushes too deep. Some campgrounds amplify that. Some pull it out of you until you start believing in the stories that used to make you laugh. Still, there's a difference between paranoia and pattern. And once you've seen enough parks, you start to recognize which stories repeat. Black Mesa isn't the only one with whispers, or footprints, or missing campers. Across the states, from Oregon to Alabama, the same warnings show up in different forms. Locals change the names, swap out details, but the shape of the fear stays the same. I used to think that was coincidence. Now, I'm not so sure. Because the night before I left Oklahoma, I stopped at another park 2 hours away, Coyote Ridge RV Grounds. Different town, different landscape. And yet, when I pulled in and went to check the electric hookup, there in the dust beneath my back bumper were the same barefoot prints. And that, I think, is where fiction ends and something far stranger begins. I didn't sleep that night at Coyote Ridge. You'd think exhaustion would have taken over after the drive, but no. Adrenaline has its own rhythm, its own clock that doesn't care what time it is. I sat in the driver's seat again, headlights off, hands on the steering wheel, just watching the park through the windshield. The place had a strange geometry to it. Rows of empty sites lined with motionless trailers that looked more like relics than homes. Each one had little signs of life, though. Half-burned firewood, chairs still facing the pit, a mug left on a picnic table. It was the silence that made it worse. When an RV park goes quiet, it's not peaceful. It's wrong. Because even in the middle of nowhere, you expect something. A generator hum, a door shutting, an insect buzz. But this place, it was the kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums until you start hearing your own pulse. I told myself the prints were just old, maybe from a maintenance worker or a kid passing through barefoot. But denial is a fragile comfort. It only lasts as long as nothing else happens. Around 2 a.m., I heard the crunch of gravel, a slow, deliberate rhythm like someone walking right beside the RV. I didn't move. The sound paused at the rear door, then circled to the front. I caught a shadow crossing the windshield, tall and narrow, stopping right where the moonlight fell through the trees, and that's when I saw it. The same thing from Black Mesa, crouched low, its skin gray under the light, its head tilted too far to the side. It didn't run. It just stared, like it was trying to remember me. That was the first moment I admitted something real. Maybe the stories about haunted RV parks weren't born from superstition. Maybe they were warnings, passed down The way people used to talk about places you shouldn't fish or trails you shouldn't follow after dark. I started thinking about how many disappearances happen in these out of the way campgrounds, the ones never big enough to make the news. Folks who just moved on, whose rigs get found weeks later, doors open, keys in the ignition. The thing about camping culture is we trade stories like currency. You'll meet someone at a rest stop. They'll share a story about a place they swore they'd never return to. Sometimes they laugh when they tell it, sometimes they don't. But behind all those stories are pieces of truth, patterns, the kind your mind starts stitching together when you've been on the road too long. When the shadow vanished, I did something that surprised even me. I got out. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the cold. The air had that electric quality it gets before a storm, as though the sky was clear. Every instinct screamed to get back inside, but the human brain has a way of chasing its own fear just to prove it can. I walked to the edge of the lot, sweeping the beam across the gravel. There were prints again, deeper this time, like something heavier than a man had made them. They led toward the line of trees that bordered the park. I followed them maybe 10 yards before they stopped, abruptly, right at the tree line. That same clean ending, like before, but something else was there this time, an indentation in the dirt, round and shallow, like a knee had pressed into the ground, and in the middle of that mark, a handprint. Smaller than mine, too small. I backed up. The forest was pitch black beyond the reach of my flashlight, but I could feel it, something watching. And then the smell hit me. Wet metal. The same one from Black Mesa. That's when the realization clicked. This wasn't about geography. Whatever this was, it moved, followed. By dawn, I'd packed up and left. I didn't even bother dumping my tanks or checking out. Just drove straight west. I remember looking in the rearview mirror and seeing my own reflection, pale and worn, and wondering what I'd done to earn something like this. Was it curiosity? Was it that I'd listened when I should have ignored? It's easy to talk about danger in terms of statistics, bear attacks, carbon monoxide, fire hazards, but none of those will prepare you for the danger of knowing too much. Once you've stared into the unknown long enough, it starts staring back. I ended up in Arizona, near a place called Painted Rock Campground, a few hours southwest of Phoenix. It was supposed to be safe. Flat desert, no trees, nothing to hide behind. The ground was cracked and dry, the air warm even after dark. I thought maybe I could reset, shake the paranoia off. The locals had their own warnings, of course. They always do. Don't camp near the petroglyphs, one of the old-timers told me at a diner. People say they glow sometimes. That's not light, that's memory. I didn't believe him. Not really. But after 2 strange nights, I set up my rig far from the rock formations, just to humor the idea. When the wind picked up around midnight, I heard the sound again, the dragging, rhythmic scrape. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It was coming from underneath the RV. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the floor, and felt a vibration, soft but steady, like something crawling against the metal undercarriage. Every nerve in my body screamed not to check, but fear can't coexist with curiosity for long. Eventually, one wins. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and crouched down. There was nothing. Just sand. Just silence. And then, as I turned to get back inside, the door, the one I'd locked from the inside, slowly swung open. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was about coincidence. Something was using the spaces I traveled through, moving with me, maybe through me. The thought made me nauseous. But there's another kind of fear too, the quiet one that follows when nothing happens after something should have, the kind that eats you slowly because it doesn't need proof. By morning, I was ready to leave again. But before I did, I took a walk to the petroglyphs. They were carved into the basalt, spirals, hands, shapes that looked like figures with outstretched arms. Some of the carvings were so worn down, they barely existed anymore, like they were trying to vanish from memory. One in particular stopped me cold. A simple human outline. Next to it, a smaller one, crouched low, its hand touching the larger figure's foot. The The same image I'd seen under my RV the night before. I don't know what I was supposed to understand from that. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was connection. But I remember thinking, if those carvings really were memory, then maybe whatever I'd seen had always been here, just waiting for people like me to notice again. People talk about the fiction of RV park horrors, creatures, ghosts, vanishings, but I've come to think the truth is much simpler and much worse. The parks themselves aren't haunted. The land is. And the parks just happen to be where the land still remembers what lived there before we paved over it. And when you stay long enough, the land starts remembering you. I didn't tell anyone about the carvings at Painted Rock. Some truths don't survive being spoken aloud. They lose their power, or worse, they draw attention. So I did what I always do when the road starts whispering too loud. I moved. West again through the low, sunburnt passes of California until I reached a small RV park outside of Joshua Tree called Silver Horizon. The name sounded peaceful, almost poetic, and the website showed happy retirees with lawn chairs and dogs. But when I arrived, the real place felt different. Too quiet, too still. Like a stage after the actors have left, but before the lights go out. There were maybe 5 occupied rigs scattered across the gravel lots, and the rest sat in various states of abandonment. Cracked windows, dry-rotted tires, and faded stickers from road trips long over. I parked near the edge, facing the desert. The air shimmered with heat, even as the sun dipped low. I remember thinking that maybe finally this would be normal. No voices, no prints, no movement under the rig, just open space. For a few hours it was. I grilled some food outside, let the radio play low. The wind was warm, carrying that faint electric hum of desert life. Cicadas, wind brushing against tin, the endless rhythm of small creatures doing what they've always done. Then, around dusk, I saw the first reflection. It came from the RV 2 lots over, a pane of glass catching the last streak of sunset. But the light didn't fade when the sun dipped. It pulsed, almost breathing. And when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't the reflection of the sky at all. It was inside the RV. A lantern, I thought. Someone still awake. But as I squinted, a figure moved across the window, thin, hunched, and wrong in the way shadows sometimes look when they bend where they shouldn't. Something about the way it moved hit that deep, primal part of the brain that knows before it understands. My chest tightened, the light flickered once, then vanished. I told myself I wouldn't go over there. I'd learned that lesson. But curiosity isn't always about wanting answers. Sometimes it's about refusing to be afraid of the questions. So I walked toward it. The desert air had cooled fast, carrying that mineral tang that comes after a hot day breaks. Gravel crunched under my boots. The other RVs loomed like silent sentinels, reflecting my flashlight beam in dull patches of chrome and glass. When I reached the door of the darkened rig, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The door was sealed from the outside. Someone had hammered a metal plate over the latch, screwed tight into the frame. I should have turned back, but I looked through the small side window instead. Inside, the air was dense with dust. There were still dishes on the counter, a calendar pinned above the dinette, March 2016, a jacket hanging by the door, and on the window opposite, drawn in something brown and dry, were handprints. Hundreds of them, small and overlapping, smeared across the glass like someone had pressed against it again and again, trying to get out, or keep something in. I stumbled back, adrenaline flooding through me. My flashlight trembled, beam scattering against the gravel. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it a low whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That's when I noticed the footprints again. Bare, pressed deep into the dust near the wheels of that same rig. Only this time they weren't leading away. They led toward mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake with every light inside the RV on, every door locked. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft crackle of the inverter, they were the only sounds that kept me from feeling completely alone. But at some point after midnight, the air changed. It got heavy, thick, as if the oxygen itself had weight. And then came the sound, a faint scratching from the roof. slow, deliberate, like nails dragging across metal. I froze, holding my breath. The scratching stopped, then something tapped once, right above me. And another, 3 slow, hollow taps. Perfectly spaced, like punctuation. I don't know how long I sat there, counting each heartbeat. Eventually, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, hoping to find a branch or loose cable. But the roof was clean. No debris, no claw marks, nothing. Except for one thing. On the back ladder, right below the roofline, was a small dark stain. I touched it without thinking. Sticky, metallic smelling. Blood. And drawn in it on the metal rung was a single handprint. Small. Like a child's. That was when I realized I wasn't just seeing these things, I was carrying them. Whatever had followed me from Oklahoma had found a way to travel with me, like a shadow stitched to my movement. When I left Silver Horizon the next morning, I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't stop for gas. I just drove until the sky started to lighten, until my mind was too exhausted to fight itself anymore. Somewhere near the Mojave, I pulled over at a rest stop, the kind with nothing but picnic tables and broken lights. I killed the engine and sat in silence. The desert stretched in all directions, a flat ocean of dust and rock, and for the first time I didn't feel alone. Not in the comforting sense, but in the aware sense. Like something was sitting right behind me, watching me through the reflection of the windshield. When I finally dared to look, there was nothing. Just my own reflection, pale and sleepless. But behind my head, faint and ghost-like in the reflection, was a second outline. I blinked. It was gone. That was the moment I decided to stop chasing answers. Because every time I tried to prove what was real, reality shifted just enough to make me doubt myself. That's the danger of RV life no one talks about. The psychological erosion of isolation. You start thinking too long in empty spaces, and the silence learns your name. You stop distinguishing between what's outside and what's inside your own mind. But even knowing that, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fear wasn't imagined. It had pattern, consistency, rhythm. And that meant something real, something conscious, was behind it. Over time, I started piecing together a theory, not about ghosts or creatures, but about memory. What if these places, the forgotten RV parks, the ones at the edge of maps, aren't haunted by people, but by what people leave behind? Every traveler leaves residue, fear, loneliness, longing. It seeps into the soil, into the metal, into the air ducts of old RVs that sit untouched for years. And maybe, just maybe, that residue collects, takes form, and follows whoever's most willing to notice it. Maybe that's why it followed me. Because I kept listening. I wish I could say it ended there. But some roads don't close behind you. They bend back slowly until you find yourself driving in circles without realizing it. And that's exactly what happened next. The road into Nevada felt endless. A straight ribbon of blacktop cutting through sand and scrub, sky so wide it swallowed my sense of scale. I'd been driving for hours without a single passing car. My GPS still showed the route heading north, but something in my gut said otherwise. The sun was higher than it should have been for mid-morning light, and each time I glanced at the odometer, the miles barely changed. When I finally reached a sign, it was weather-beaten, the lettering almost gone. Juniper Flats RV Park, 3 miles ahead. The name rang no bell, but the moment I saw it, an odd déjà vu gripped me. My stomach knotted, my palms damp on the wheel. I'd been avoiding RV parks altogether for a while, sticking to rest stops and public lands, but the need for water and electricity and the slow creeping exhaustion of the road pushed me past my instinct. The gravel drive into Juniper Flats wound through a sparse stand of juniper trees, their limbs twisted and gnarled as if shaped by decades of wind. My tires kicked up a pale dust that lingered behind me like fog. The office was a small cabin with a slanted porch and a single rocking chair moving ever so slightly, though no one sat in it. I stepped out, stretching my cramped legs. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was cloudless, sharp, electric, almost metallic. A bell above the office door jingled as I went in. The interior was dim, walls lined with faded maps. A single ledger lay open on the counter. No one was there. but scrawled across the most recent page in uneven handwriting was my name, Ethan Cole. My heart skipped. I hadn't called ahead, hadn't written my name down anywhere for weeks, yet there it was, black ink, today's date. A door creaked somewhere deeper in the office. I called out, "Hello?" But the sound of my own voice felt thin, swallowed by the stillness. No answer, just the faint sound of water dripping somewhere behind the wall. I backed out, the bell above the door jingling once more. The rocking chair had stopped moving. The park itself was small, maybe 20 sites arranged in a rough circle. Most were empty. A few had old rigs, sun-bleached and half-buried in dust, windows black as though painted from the inside. I chose a spot near the edge, closest to the trees. It was habit now. Always park where you can see the open space ahead of you. As I hooked up my water line, I saw it. A small handprint in the dust on my rear bumper, fresh enough that particles still shifted in the breeze. I froze, a wave of dizziness washing over me. This wasn't just happening at night anymore. Inside the RV, I pulled the blinds down and sat at the dinette, listening. The air conditioner clicked softly. Somewhere outside, a bird gave a single sharp cry, then silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but waiting. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel, slow, measured, circling. My pulse hammered in my ears. Through a slit in the blinds, I caught a glimpse of a figure passing between the trees. Too thin, moving with an odd, rolling gait, like a shadow walking upright. I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's just exhaustion." It's not real. But then something pressed against the side of the RV. The whole rig shifted slightly, springs creaking. A low scraping sound moved along the aluminum siding from back to front, ending at the door. The handle rattled. Once. Twice. I grabbed the nearest thing, a wrench, and crept toward the door, my breath shallow. The handle turned again, but didn't open. A faint whisper leaked through the seam. I pressed my ear to it. It said my name. Drawn out, almost tender. Ethan. I yanked the door open. Wrench raised. No one. Just the trees swaying in a breeze that hadn't been there a moment before. I stepped out, scanning the ground. Bare prints again, leading from the tree line to my door, and this time a smaller set alongside them, like a child's. They circled my rig twice and stopped at the hitch, where a small indentation marked the dirt. Kneeling, I saw it wasn't an indentation at all. It was a carving. A spiral etched into the earth itself, the same pattern I'd seen at Painted Rock. My vision swam. The metallic smell grew stronger, mixed now with something sweet like overripe fruit. That's when the whisper came again, not from outside, but from the soil itself. Low, almost a vibration more than sound. Stay. I bolted back inside, locked the door, and slammed the blinds shut. My chest heaved, sweat slick on my neck. Hours passed. The sun sank, shadows stretching like claws across the lot. Each time the wind shifted, the RV creaked, and my heart jumped. Finally, when the sky had gone deep indigo, I saw movement through the rear window. A shape standing at the tree line, too still to be human. Its head tilted, long fingers hanging at its sides. Another smaller shape stepped from behind it, reaching up to hold its hand. My breath caught. The larger one raised its arm slowly and pointed at me. The lights inside my RV flickered. The air grew thick, heavy with that metallic tang until it felt like I was breathing iron. I backed into the driver's seat, turned the key. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. A tap sounded on the window beside me. Light, then another. 3 in total, like before. And then the whisper, louder now, close enough to feel against my ear, though no one was there. We remember. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, heart racing. Leave me alone. I shouted, the sound ragged in my own ears. Silence. When I looked up, the shapes were gone. The lights steadied. The air felt thinner again, breathable. I didn't sleep. I waited until the first weak light of dawn, turned the key again, and this time the engine roared to life. I drove out of Juniper Flats without looking back, dust rising in my mirrors like ghosts dissolving. Somewhere along the highway as the sun climbed higher, I caught myself laughing. A brittle, hollow sound. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd been resisting for months. This wasn't about parks. It wasn't about superstition. It wasn't even about danger in the usual sense. It was about memory. Places remember, and some memories remember you back. The RV life teaches you a lot about risk, carbon monoxide alarms, propane leaks, safe parking, but it doesn't teach you what to do when a place recognizes you, when it calls your name across states, across nights, across every lonely mile of road. That's the danger no one writes on the welcome sign. And if you stay long enough, it starts to feel less like danger and more like invitation. I don't know where the line is between fact and fiction anymore, but I know this. When the wind carries your name at night, it's already too late to pretend you're just passing through. By the time I crossed into California again, I'd stopped listening to the radio altogether. Every voice I heard through static started to sound like mine, stretched and warped, echoing back words I didn't remember saying. The hum of the tires became my only rhythm, the last thread holding me to something that still felt human. It's strange how fear matures. At first, it's sharp, adrenaline, panic, the urge to run. But after weeks on the road with something unseen behind you, it starts to dull into something quieter. You stop being afraid of what's out there and start questioning what's left inside you. I camped one last time near a dry lake bed north of Barstow, a place called Desert Echo RV Stop. It wasn't on most maps, but I saw a faded sign pointing the way off Route 58 and thought maybe a night in the open air would help me breathe again. It was a small, wind-beaten park with no manager on duty, just an honor box and an empty clipboard where names should have been. I didn't bother signing. I parked near the edge where cracked earth met endless sand. The horizon shimmered like heat had a heartbeat. My RV looked smaller than ever against the emptiness. A white shell in an ocean of dust. For the first time in weeks, I left the doors open as I set up camp. Let the hot wind flow through. I needed it. The reminder that there was still air, still movement, still life. I grilled dinner under a bleeding sunset, the colors like a wound healing too slow. The silence wasn't hostile here. It was watchful, like the desert itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. That's when I saw the note. It was folded under my wiper blade, thin paper turned translucent with grease. No footprints around the rig, no vehicle tracks, but my own. The handwriting was the same as what I'd seen in the ledger at Juniper Flats, shaky, uneven. It read, "Stop running. You made it remember." My stomach dropped. The wind tore at the edges of the note before I could even refold it. It disintegrated in my hand like something that was never meant to last. That night, the air stayed warm long after the sun was gone. The moon rose dull and red, like it had bled through its own light. I sat outside of my camp chair, beer sweating in my palm, eyes fixed on the empty desert. I told myself I wasn't afraid, that I was done being the hunted. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over, and I was right. Around midnight, the sound came again, soft at first, almost a vibration through the dirt. Then, footsteps. Not approaching, but circling, wide arcs around my RV, crunching the loose gravel just far enough to stay out of sight. I held my breath. The wind had died completely. Each step was distinct. Then the smell hit. That same burnt metal tang, mixed now with dust and something like ozone before lightning strikes. The air pressure dropped, and I heard it. The faintest hum beneath the surface, low and steady, like the earth itself was exhaling. Something was coming up. I dropped to my knees beside the RV, flashlight trembling in my grip, scanning the ground. The sand had begun to crack in a perfect spiral. Small at first, widening with every second, grains shifting inward toward a dark center. And from that spiral, a hand emerged, gray, thin, slick with something darker than water. Then another. They pulled at the earth like it was fabric. And then the shape rose. That same hunched figure, head cocked to the side, watching me from a distance that felt too close. Behind it, smaller shapes began to surface, dozens of them, half-formed, crawling out of the spiral like memories trying to become flesh. I stumbled back, breath gone, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The tallest one, the first, stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and when it straightened, I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was mine. Not distorted, not monstrous, just me. Pale, hollow-eyed, older, the skin drawn tight as if it had been waiting longer than time itself. It smiled, that same impossible, knowing smile I'd seen back at Black Mesa, and lifted its hand. I heard my own voice come from its mouth. You wanted to know what's real. I stumbled backward, shaking my head, trying to speak, but the air had weight like language couldn't survive here. The smaller ones stopped moving, all eyes fixed on me. And then the older version of me, whatever it was, said one more thing, in a voice that sounded like it had been pulled apart and reassembled 1,000 times. You made the stories true. The light from my RV flickered, the generator sputtered, and the ground beneath the spiral glowed faintly, not bright. Just enough to cast shadows that moved when nothing else did. I turned and ran. The desert swallowed sound. My boots kicked dust into clouds that hung in the air. When I looked back, the spiral had collapsed and the shapes were gone. Nothing remained but stillness, the kind that hums. By the time I reached the highway, dawn was breaking. The sky stretched open, vast and merciless, painting everything in colors too calm for what had just happened. I pulled over, shaking, and watched the sun burn the horizon gold, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because I was safe, I knew I wasn't, but because I finally understood. RV park horror stories, campfire legends, whispers about disappearances. They're not lies, they're echoes. Residual truths left behind by those who stayed too long, by those who asked too many questions, by people like me. The real danger isn't ghosts or creatures. It's memory itself, the way a place remembers fear, and the way fear reshapes a place. Every time we tell a story about a haunted campground or a cursed trail, we feed it. We keep it alive. We teach it our language, and once it knows your name, once you've taught it to recognize your voice, you can't take that back. So now, when people ask me, what's the scariest RV park you've ever stayed at? I tell them the truth, the one that remembers me. I've stopped parking in campgrounds altogether. I stick to back roads now, places without hookups, without names. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, convinced I hear footsteps on the roof or the whisper of sand moving against the tires. But I don't check anymore because I know it's not outside, it's just the road, whispering back what I've taught it. And maybe in its own strange way, that's what the wilderness was always meant to do. If you're out there tonight, parked somewhere quiet, listening to the hum of your generator, and you think you hear your name in the wind, don't answer, because the moment you do, the stories stop being stories, and they start remembering you. I never thought the cold could feel like it was breathing down my neck. My name is Marissa, I'm 29, and I've spent enough winters chasing the peaks of the Pacific Northwest to know that snow can hide more than it reveals. That January morning, I parked my old Volkswagen camper at a small, mostly forgotten lot near the Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood. The frost clung to the windows like a film of fragile glass, and the world outside was a monochrome of gray and white, quiet except for the faint scrape of wind across pine branches. I had told myself it was just another solo winter trip, an escape from the city's noise and my own tangled thoughts. But even as I set up my small propane stove, a subtle unease began to gnaw at me. The first hint that this would be no ordinary trip came when I noticed the footprints. Not my own, not recent tracks from hikers or cross-country skiers, but a trail that started near the edge of the parking lot and seemed to circle the camper, half hidden beneath drifting snow. I stared at them through the frost, trying to rationalize, maybe a ranger, maybe someone lost. But there was something deliberate about the way the prints moved, slow, measured, stopping just out of sight before continuing, the kind of pattern that makes a person doubt their own judgment. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things, but the pit in my stomach refused to settle. By mid-afternoon, the sun had become a dim presence behind heavy clouds, and the forest around me had swallowed the day in muted silence. I bundled up and decided to explore the small ridge behind the lot, hoping to clear my head. The snow crunched beneath my boots, a sound so loud in the stillness it startled me each time. There was a smell in the air, sharp, metallic, almost like ice, and something older, something burned and damp at once. I paused, scanning the trees, expecting some wildlife, but there was nothing. The wind shifted, and for a fleeting moment I could have sworn I heard a low exhale, human but distant, carried across the white slope. My pulse quickened. "It's just the wind," I muttered, though my voice sounded brittle, even to my own ears. Returning to the camper, I tried to ignore the way the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the snow, how the pines bent as if leaning in to watch. I made a small fire in my portable stove, the warmth barely reaching past my toes, and tried to focus on something grounding. My journal. The kind of forced gratitude entries you write when everything inside you is screaming unease. And that's when I saw it. A movement beyond the camper, a dark shape flitting behind a tree, disappearing the moment I blinked. My hands froze on the pen. I told myself I needed sleep, that I was exhausted from hiking, from the relentless cold, from months of stress and solitude. But sleep didn't come easily. Every groan of the camper, every rattle of ice against the metal roof felt amplified, alive. My mind refused to shut down, alert to the faintest of sounds that might mean danger, or something worse, a presence I couldn't name. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, the kind of cold that presses against the chest and makes every breath visible. I had bundled myself in every layer I brought, yet I still shivered uncontrollably. That's when the knocking started. Not loud, not frantic, but deliberate. 3 soft raps against the side of the camper. I froze, staring at the frosted window, listening as the echo lingered and then faded into the wind. Rational thoughts scrambled. It could be a branch, a bird, even a falling icicle. Yet my gut screamed otherwise. I whispered my own name. "Marissa, it's just the wind," trying to convince myself, but the sound came again, rhythmic, patient, as if counting the seconds before stepping closer. Heart hammering, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the snow giving way beneath my boots with a muted crunch. The world was still and white, the trees swaying faintly, as if holding their breath. And there it was. The footprints, circling the camper again, fresher this time, impossibly deep in the hard-packed snow. I followed them instinctively, tracing the path around the van, noting how they never seemed to approach me directly, yet always stayed just within the range of my flashlight's beam. I stopped at the edge of the ridge, and for the first time, I heard a voice, or at least something shaped like a voice, carried in the wind, a whisper too low to understand, curling around me like smoke, brushing my skin with icy fingers. I swallowed hard, my voice caught somewhere between panic and disbelief. "Who's there?" No answer came, only silence that pressed against my ears until I felt dizzy. I ran back to the camper, slammed the door, and pressed myself against the wall, counting my breaths, willing the rational part of me to regain control. Eventually, I drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep, only to wake hours later to the faint smell of smoke. I bolted upright, my pulse wild, scanning the interior. The stove was off, the small fire extinguished, nothing burning, yet the scent lingered, metallic and acrid. I opened the door. Nothing. The ridge was empty, the forest unmoving, yet somewhere in the trees I could swear a shadow flickered, watching, waiting. That's when I realized the prints led away from the camper now, trailing up into the woods, disappearing into the dark. And something in me understood. They were leaving a trail for me to follow, or perhaps to lure me into the unknown. By sunrise, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The wind had died down, leaving the world eerily still. I packed slowly, methodically, trying to ignore the nagging sense that I was being observed, that the mountain itself was aware of me, measuring me against some unknowable standard. As I drove down the winding road from the timberline lot, my camper skidding slightly on patches of ice, I glanced back at the ridge. The snow had already begun to cover the prints, erasing evidence of the night's events, but the unease lingered, embedded deep in my chest. I realized then that the mountain wasn't just a place I visited. It was an entity, patient, cold, and capable of watching without being seen. And somehow, in that stark silence, I understood I had learned something vital. Respect the place and never assume you are truly alone, even when you think you are. The wind had picked up again by the time I pulled into the next pullout, a narrow clearing just wide enough for the camper to squeeze through. I told myself I was stopping to rest, maybe take a short walk to shake off the lingering tension, but my instincts screamed at me that this part of the mountain had a weight all its own. I parked, wrapped myself in a heavy wool blanket, and sat staring at the fog rolling down the slopes. The way it moved made it feel almost alive, curling around the pines and rocks like fingers searching for something. Every shadow seemed to shift in the periphery, and I found myself turning repeatedly, flashlight in hand, even though I had no real reason to. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the tree line. Not a branch breaking under the weight of snow, not a falling rock. This was deliberate, slow, almost cautious. I strained to see, holding my breath, willing my eyes to adjust to the gray half-light, but the fog swallowed everything beyond the first row of trees. I debated calling anyone, to tell them where I was, but the signal was spotty at best. My hands shook as I fumbled with the phone, realizing the battery had already dropped to near empty from the cold. The scraping came again, closer this time, circling the camper. I swallowed hard, forcing my panic down just enough to think, to plan. Slowly, I grabbed the small trekking pole I kept near the door and stepped outside. The snow was icy beneath my boots, a slick mirror that reflected the dim light of the early morning sky. My breath came in sharp bursts, visible in the thin air, but I forced myself forward, scanning for movement. The prints were there again, fresh, impossibly crisp despite the icy layer the morning had laid over everything else. They led down a narrow slope into the trees, then disappeared entirely. I followed them cautiously, slipping on patches of black ice, every snap of a twig beneath my boots making me flinch. The forest seemed to close in around me, the pines leaning closer, their needles scratching against my jacket as if warning me back. Then I saw it. A small clearing, untouched by footprints except for one set that ended abruptly at the center, where the snow was disturbed as though someone or something had knelt or crouched there. A bitter wind swept through, carrying a whisper that tugged at the edges of my mind, incomprehensible yet unmistakably there. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, suddenly aware of the sound of my own breathing, loud and erratic. That's when the shadow moved. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it stepped lightly from behind a tree, a figure tall and cloaked, indistinct in the fog, its movements deliberate and unnervingly silent. I froze, unable to rationalize, unable to turn away. My first instinct was to run, but my body refused, locked in the mix of fear and fascination that comes when you know you are completely unprepared for what you're facing. The figure paused, just beyond the reach of the dim light, and then, slowly, it began to retreat, stepping back into the mist, leaving me with the sharp tang of fear and something else, a strange, oppressive cold that felt as if it had seeped into my bones. I ran back to the camper without looking back, each footfall loud in the ghostly quiet. Inside, I slammed the door, bolted it, and sank to the floor, my back pressed against the wall. My hands were trembling uncontrollably as I tried to gather my thoughts. Rational explanations began to tumble through my mind. Maybe someone was lost, maybe it was a hunter, maybe I was seeing things because of exhaustion and cold, but none of them felt true. None could explain the deliberate pattern of the footprints, the whispers carried on the wind, or the figure itself. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell in the gray, frozen half-light. Sleep eluded me entirely. Every creak of the camper, every whisper of wind over the ridge set my nerves on edge, and I found myself imagining all the ways this mountain could swallow a person whole and leave nothing behind. By mid-morning, I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. The forest felt like it was closing in, the snow shifting and settling with an almost predatory patience. I packed methodically, though my movements were clumsy from fear and fatigue, glancing repeatedly at the ridge as if expecting the figure to emerge again. The camper shivered beneath my hands as I started the engine, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the rearview mirror, something slipping between trees too quickly to identify. I pressed the accelerator gently, keeping my eyes on the narrow road, heart racing, every instinct screaming to leave. And yet, as I descended the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest, the snow, and whatever had followed me that night were watching, waiting for me to slip, to misstep, to succumb to the icy patience that seemed embedded in the very air of Mount Hood. The drive down was tense, each bend revealing more of the stark winter landscape. But the deeper I went into the valley, the more the oppressive atmosphere seemed to loosen its grip. Still, when I finally reached a small roadside cafe, warm and bright with the smell of coffee and toast, I realized my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my cup. I had escaped the ridge, but the mountain had left its mark. Even now, as I recount the story, the memory of the footprints, the shadow, and that cold, whispering presence lingers. I learned something vital that week on Mount Hood. Winter in the wilderness is not just cold, it is patient, observant, and capable of turning your own fears into something almost tangible. You can plan, you can prepare, but there are moments when nature itself tests you in ways that defy logic, and the only thing you can do is respect it, move carefully, and listen to every instinct your body gives you. Even as I settled into the quiet rhythm of driving away from the ridge, the sense of being watched didn't entirely leave me. Every curve in the road, every shadow cast by the skeletal winter trees seemed loaded with intent. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the hum of the engine beneath my hands, but the memory of the figure, so precise and silent, kept surfacing. My mind churned with questions I had no answers for. Why me? Why that place? Was it a person or something older, something that belonged to the mountain itself? The snow outside glistened under the pale winter sun, deceptively peaceful, yet I could feel it pressing against my thoughts like a living thing. I stopped briefly at a small creek crossing, the kind you barely notice in summer, but now the water was half frozen, moving silently beneath sheets of ice. The cold here was different, sharper, more immediate, biting at the edges of my gloves and face. I stepped out, squinting across the valley, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the trees across the water, a flicker of something dark, impossible to define. My heart thudded, a cold sweat running down my back, but I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of light, maybe a deer. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, and I realized then that whatever had followed me, or whatever presence lingered on Mount Hood, had changed how I experienced the world. Every sound, every movement, every shadow had the potential to be a message, a warning, or a lure. Nightfall found me at a tiny roadside inn, the kind of place that feels insulated from the wilderness yet carries its own quiet tension. The innkeeper, a grizzled man with a voice like gravel, didn't ask many questions when I checked in, which suited me fine. I spent hours sitting by the window with a mug of something hot in my hands, staring out into the darkened forest on the far ridge. I replayed every step of the last 2 days, the footprints that circled the camper, the whispering wind, the shadow in the fog, the icy stillness of the ridge. I realized something. I had survived because I listened to the tiniest impulses, the instincts I would normally dismiss in the city, the unease that told me to follow the prints carefully, the fear that made me run when the shadow appeared. Each decision had been a test, a negotiation between rationality and instinct, and for the first time in years, I felt acutely aware of what it meant to truly rely on myself. The next morning, I drove cautiously down the winding roads, the mountain retreating behind me like a sleeping giant. Every mile felt both like freedom and like leaving something unfinished. I stopped once more at a clearing near the Timberline Lodge, just to look back at the ridge where it had all begun. Snow clung to every tree, every rock, unbroken except for the faintest indentations that could have been footprints, or nothing at all. The wind picked up again, whispering across the valley, carrying a cold that pressed against my face. And for the first time, I understood that Mount Hood's winter wilderness was not an enemy in the conventional sense. It was an entity with its own rules, its own tests, and it had taught me something vital. That fear, when respected and understood, is not paralysis. It is guidance, a survival instinct honed by both caution and attentiveness. I left the mountain with more than relief. I left with a deep sense of humility. Each time I revisit that ridge in memory, I remember the quiet patience of the snow, the calculated rhythm of the footsteps, the whispering voice in the wind. I've returned to other peaks since then, and each time I camp in my Volkswagen, I carry the lessons with me. Move deliberately, trust instincts, honor the place, and never underestimate the silence. The mountain's shadow lingers in my mind, not as terror, but as a reminder that nature is alive in ways we rarely comprehend, and survival is as much about awareness and respect as it is about physical preparation. That January on Mount Hood changed me, leaving an icy trace in my chest that reminds me even now of the delicate boundary between fear and empowerment. Looking back, I realized that the presence I felt wasn't malevolent. It was a test, an echo of the wilderness itself, reminding me that the world is vast, patient, and observant. I learned to carry that awareness beyond Mount Hood into every quiet forest, every snow-laden ridge, every place where the line between solitude and exposure is thin. The winter's breath on the ridge was not merely cold, it was alive, watching, and instructive. And when I feel its memory now, I understand that fear, when faced and respected, becomes a guide, and that even in the deepest, most isolating wilderness, there is a lesson waiting for those willing to see beyond the shadows. Even as I settled back into the rhythm of life after Mount Hood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside me. The mountain had left its mark, not just in memory, but in the way I moved through the world. Ordinary forests, quiet winter roads, even the smallest snowfall triggered a memory of that ridge, the whispering wind, the footprints, the shadow that had retreated just beyond reach. Friends asked if I'd imagined it, if the exhaustion or cold had played tricks on me, but I knew what I had seen and felt. Mount Hood had a presence, a patience that didn't seek to harm, but demanded attention, demanded respect. And the lesson lingered. Awareness is survival. Weeks later, curiosity drove me back toward the mountain, though I approached from a different route this time, a path less traveled. My camper, familiar and sturdy, felt like an extension of myself. As I ascended the snowy roads, I noticed the forest seemed different, less threatening, yet heavier, as if it remembered me. I stopped briefly at a small ridge I had ignored before, looking out over the valley. The snow shimmered faintly, untouched, pristine, but I thought I saw subtle movements in the corner of my vision. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, but I didn't panic. Instead, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of what I had learned. The mountain's gaze was patient, and I was no longer entirely unprepared. Night fell quickly, and the temperature dropped as usual, but this time I felt more in tune with the surroundings. I parked my camper near the edge of a frozen creek, the ice reflecting the pale moonlight, and set up my small stove. The wind whispered around me, curling between the pines, carrying that familiar icy tang that had haunted me before. But instead of fear, there was a quiet anticipation. I listened closely, feeling the subtle shifts in the snow, the faintest movements of branches overhead. Hours passed, and though I felt the presence near me, I was not paralyzed. I moved deliberately, aware, alert, but calm. It was as if the mountain itself was acknowledging that I had learned its rhythm. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the far edge of the clearing, and I froze. Unlike the last time, I did not flee immediately. My flashlight swept across the snow, illuminating nothing but a swaying branch, yet I knew the figure had been there. The sense of being observed was stronger than ever, and I could feel the presence's patient curiosity pressing against me. I whispered my own name, grounding myself, and slowly I traced a path along the edge of the clearing. The footprints were faint, almost indistinguishable under the frost, but I followed them carefully, noting their precise, deliberate pattern. The shadow moved again, distant but deliberate, never threatening, only guiding or testing. By dawn, the wind had died down, leaving the forest in a hushed, silver light. The shadow had vanished, the footprints fading into snow, and I was left with a profound sense of respect and awe. Mount Hood had not changed. I had. I realized that the mountain's icy breath was not meant to terrify. It was a teacher, patient and exacting, imparting lessons in awareness, courage, and humility. As I drove down the winding roads, the sun glinting off the snow-laden slopes, I felt a deep sense of clarity. Fear, when faced and understood, becomes a tool, a guide that sharpens perception and strengthens resolve. Even now, when I recall that winter on Mount Hood, I can feel the cold pressing against me, the whispering wind curling in my ears, and the sense of something unseen observing my every move. But instead of panic, there is empowerment. I learned that the wilderness tests those who enter it, not to harm, but to teach. Every camper, every hiker, every soul who ventures into the winter woods carries that potential to face fear, to respect the unseen, and to emerge stronger, wiser, more attuned to the delicate balance between solitude and vigilance. Mount Hood remains patient and silent, and I carry its lesson with me. Fear is not weakness, and survival is not merely endurance. It is understanding, awareness, and respect for the world around us. I drive my Volkswagen now with a heightened sense of attentiveness, carrying emergency supplies, maps, and more importantly, the quiet knowledge that the forests, the ridges, the snow, they are alive in ways we often fail to comprehend. Winter camping is not just a hobby. It is a dialogue with the land, an exercise in humility and observation. That ridge, the whispers, the footprints, they were reminders that the boundary between fear and empowerment is narrow, yet traversable. And I realized, finally, that the mountain's icy breath is not something to escape from, but something to honor, to learn from, and to let shape the way we move through both wilderness and life.